Hello, good evening, good day, everybody, and welcome back to the Ask Abhijit show. Today we are doing episode 330, and I'm going to take questions from the comments. Questions you have asked in the comments about geopolitics and history. Before we get into that, let me see who all is there on the live chat. Before I do that, just a brief announcement. The next live stream, episode 331, will not happen tomorrow. It will happen on Monday, 8 p.m. India time. Tomorrow, as some of you may know, there is an India Pakistan cricket match around the same time. And if I do the live stream at that time, I suppose very few people will watch. I've tried in the past, it doesn't work. So, I've moved it to Monday, 8 p.m. Okay. Uh, let's see what is there on the live chat. Akshay Bharadwaj, Ice Golem is very excited. Good to see you, Ice Golem. Dhruv 1055, Chess Pro 11, Anshuman Mohapatra Devanama Priya, Football Bhakt, Abhijit Ayer Mitra. Oh, clearly, someone with that name. Okay. Arav Shah, Zubon Izang, Geopolitical Dubai from Indore, Gajapati Dev from Odisha, SKR7733, Giora TV, The Strummer 1989, Rekha Humble, Jai Shri Ram, ma'am. Uh, who else? Advait Ashwini, Rishikesh Talukdar, Hula Senor, Kiki Sushant. Good morning to you. Good morning. Giora TV once again, Real Vladimir Putin, Ram Ramji, Navadita Das, Namaste, Prasad Adalal. Okay, yeah, hi. McLevin69, good evening. Kahan, hello. Uh, who else? Who else? Ayush Singh, Pranam Sarji, Pranam to you. Devik Shriyan, Namaste. Ashish Chabra, Namaste ji. Brave Robot, Meow, in Devanagari. Okay. Nagaland Shenoy is here from Hyderabad. Good evening, sir. Anant Pai, Namaskar. John M. Funk, Namaste. Abhiram Edits 1247. Good to see you, sir. Good to see you. Animish Bharatiya's daughter says hello. Well, hello to your daughter, sir. Hello. It's good to see you. Mahida Abu Shetty. Good evening, ma'am. I'm good. How are you doing? Brave Robot is cooking dinner. Well, Brave Robot is cooking dinner. I hope it's tasty and is good. Yeah. Meet Mistri Namaste. Lage raho online. Har Har Mahadev. Tanmay Deshpande. Mehta Bhushati once again. Kahan. Ombe Kerikar. Hello. Good to see you, sir. Lage raho online once again. Chandani Priya. Good evening, ma'am. Krishna of the Surinamese Netherlands. Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon. Alvin Rodriguez. Hello. Wise idiot. Good to see you. Okay. Ansh Divu. Who else do we have? Mahita Bhushati. Jai Shri Krishna indeed. Tushar Kalburgi. Good to see you. Namaste. General Subuthai. Hello. Hello. Meet Mistri once again. Back after a long time. Well, good to have you, sir. Good to have you always. This is Harsh Kapoor. Good evening. Kamal Parashar from Meerut, UP. Good to see you, sir. Vihang Korane, good to see you as well. Who else? Who else? Mac 4J1U, good to see you. Namaste. Rahul Kumar. Rakesh Mistry is here from Bangladesh. Good evening, sir. Namaskar. Namaskar. Darshan Patil is here from Mahashivratri. Happy Mahashivratri to everybody in advance. Anant Pai, no emotions left. Okay. And so many other people. Manisha Cardoso, namaste. Ansley Franco, hello. Rakesh Mistry once again. Kahan and the Strummer. Rahul Dunake, good evening. Namaste ji. Vipreet. Good to see you, Vipreet. Arjun is here from Siliguri. Well, good evening to you. Rahul Himthani is here from Mumbai. Random Skull, Jai Shri Krishna. Mac 41 J1U says, I don't watch India-Pakistan matches. Well, good for you, sir. Good for you. PG Deutschland is here from Deutschland, Germany. Well, good evening. Good afternoon to you. And thank you for the kind words. Who else do we have? We're going to have a lot of people, obviously. I won't be able to greet you all. Meet Mistry, Krishna Sharma, Ujaswit Kumar, Kastajivana, Rahul, Sanjoy Mukherjee is here from Shanghai. Good evening. Good night, I suppose, almost. Aniruddha Parakala is here from Miami. Good morning. Chess Pro Radhe Radhe Ji. So many people. Okay. So, I won't be able to greet you all individually as always, but let's see. I'll take questions from the live chat, or not from the live chat, from the comments. But I saw a couple of questions in the live chat, so let me take a couple of those just before I begin. Where are these? At the very beginning, I suppose. So, one second. Where did we have it? I saw something somewhere. Yes, Zubon Ising says, long time. Well, long time. Good to have you. There's a problem going on in Nagaland between the Nagas and the Kukis right now. Can you please analyze it for us? And SKR says, the way things are going, I think soon I will need to say good evening from Impal, Kukiland. So I'm not sure if the media is reporting much about what's happening in Manipur, Nagaland, that area. But well, yeah, what we are seeing here is what we are seeing, is what's happening. So Zubon hasn't wants me to analyze what's happening. I have analyzed this in detail, I mean, the root causes and all that. So the core issue is that this region of the far eastern region of India, the Manipur Nagaland region, it's on the border between India and Burma. I mean, let's take a look at the map. Okay, give me a second. I'll put it on the map. It's on the border. It's a border region, and to the east we have Burma, Manipur, and Nagaland both. And in this part of Burma, there's a group of there's this group of tribals, various tribal ethnicities who collectively have been given the name Kukis by the British, and who are not Indian, who are not even Burmese, and they have infiltrated in very large numbers in large areas of Manipur and so on, and the British brought them into India as a punishment for the Manipuri kings who fought against the British, the Meitei Hindu kings. Um and in 1900, the number of Kukis in Manipur was like measly, like maybe 1,000, 2,000, or whatever. You can check out the British census records. But today it's lakhs and lakhs. In the past 10 or so years, 10, 15, 20 years, several lakhs have infiltrated across the open border into Manipur. And they have taken over very large parts of Manipuri territory. These are all foreigners. But the moment they come into India, they acquire documents, and they say that we have been here forever, then we are the original inhabitants, the Meiteis are outsiders. That sort of nonsense they say. And in the 1980s and 1990s, especially the 1990s, the Kukis went to war against the Nagas. The Nagas are also an indigenous ethnic group in the region. The Meiteis and the Nagas are the indigenous people of Manipur and Nagaland. The Kukis are foreigners. In the 1990s, the Kukis went to war against the Nagas, and there were these massive clashes. And the Kukis were given shelter for some reason by the Meiteis to calm things down. Yeah. And now, 2023 onwards, the Kukis have gone to war against the Meiteis, and they've done horrific atrocities, absolute terrorism. And now that the Meiteis have been subdued with the help possibly of the Indian government, who has disarmed them. See, in the northeast of India, the far east of India, from the 1950s onwards, every state had multiple insurgencies. The government of India gave horrific stepmotherly treatment to all these states. So everybody wanted to be out of India, and everybody went insurgent in every state, whether it is Mizoram, whether it is Nagaland, whether it is Assam, whether it is Manipur, whether it is whatever the state, you had multiple insurgencies and multiple ethnic groups. So Manipur also had multiple ethnic groups. So the Meitei ethnic groups have been disarmed now, mostly by the government of India. But the Kukis are fully armed. And now they're going to war against the Nagas. The Kukis will not stop until they have taken everything over. And for some reason, the government of India seems to be okay with this. For some reason, whatever it is. So now that the Meiteis have been confined to this little part of Manipur, now the Kukis are going after the Nagas. That's what's happening right now. I'm not sure if the media is covering this. So it looks like Kukiland for Christ is happening. And see, it's not a religious issue. The Nagas are themselves now all mostly converted to Christianity. The Kukis claim to be Christian. Sometimes they claim to be Jews, even though they eat pork. But now they're going to war against the Nagas. I suppose from the government of India's perspective, this may serve some kind of geopolitical interest. I'm not sure what the interests are. I fail to see it, but maybe there is some, master stroke calculation somewhere, perhaps. So that's what's happening. So the Kukis are now going to war against the Nagas, Christian on Christian. So it looks like Kukiland has already happened. If you see the visuals coming out on social media in places like Churachandpur, you have these big mobs of Kuki terrorists armed with automatic rifles who are shouting and screaming and jumping and dancing and playing music and fighting each other and setting in other parts of Manipur, setting fire to the houses of various Naga people, Naga villages. So it looks like Kukiland has already happened. It's a de facto separate administration, de facto separate country. You don't see any Indian armed forces or Indian government officials anywhere in these videos. So Kukiland, for Christ, has happened. I would not say that India has full sovereignty or Manipur anymore. That's the situation. Okay, now let's get going with the questions I have chosen from the comments. Right. Okay. Many people wanted me to discuss the trade deal. I mean, I discussed it last week. First of all, let's see the questions. Abhijit Shukla says the US has changed the deal slightly in India's favor. Do you think India demanded it? Rushabh Tare says the US released a fact sheet and then changed it. India commits to India intends. So the joint statement between India and the US, which was put out by the Indian government, said that India intends to purchase $500 billion of US products within a certain time frame. And the American statement said that India has committed to purchasing that. So that's a pressure tactic. That's putting this falsehood out in public. The intention was to then make India post facto accept this change. So India has stood firm, and now the Americans have changed it back to India intends instead of India commits. Pulses clause. The Americans had introduced some pulses clause that was never agreed upon. Data security tax, etc. All those things. So, yeah, the Americans have tried all these backhanded maneuvers and all these pressure tactics and all these underhand tactics, all these arm twisting maneuvers and methods. So let's understand one thing very clearly, my friends. This trade deal, it's an interim framework for it's a framework for an interim trade deal. So an interim trade deal is not a final trade deal. It's a temporary thing. And what has been announced is a framework for an interim trade deal. So it's not even a deal, it's just a framework. So understand this, any deal with the US is not worth the paper it is written on. Trump will go and change it tomorrow morning. Trump will walk out of the deal if he feels like. Trump does that, doesn't he? Trump walked out recently of the deal he signed with South Korea. Trump in the past has walked away from the deal that was signed by the US with Iran, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, in 2017 or whatever it was. The US habitually walks out of deals it has signed. So understand, I don't know why certain people are celebrating this trade deal with the US. Even politicians are celebrating it in certain political parties. There's nothing to celebrate here. This is a framework for a temporary interim trade deal, which is not even the final thing. And this is a framework. And the moment the framework was announced, the Americans started, post facto changing it. So there is nothing to celebrate here. If things stand as they are okay. It's not a terribly bad deal for India. It's actually, in a variety of ways, better than the deals the Americans have given to their own allies. Okay, let's not compare with Bangladesh for 1 or 2 points. Not important. And if you see the drill down into the points, you will see that there is no comparison at all. So overall, it's a decent thing. If it actually stands, then it's actually a good deal for India compared to what the Americans have given to their allies. It's obviously not an equal deal, but the Americans aren't treating anybody equally, right? So overall, it's good relative to everything else the Americans are doing. But once again, my word of caution is that no deal signed with the Americans is worth the paper it is signed on. The Americans will anytime, at any given point in time, if they feel like it, they will tear it up and walk away. So nothing to celebrate over here, as far as I see it. Okay, next. Real Vladimir Putin says, what is the update in the Russia-India relationship? Is India falling into the American camp? Misha says, Russian deputy foreign minister says, hopes India-Russia ties won't suffer and USA is trying to ban India. Maybe Russia is worried that India may slowly reduce its oil imports. Also, India exits a Russia-backed Mali lithium project. Has the US secured a geopolitical victory? Will Delhi-Moscow relations suffer? Look, what does the US want from India? The US wants India bending the knee. the US wants India becoming their vassal. That's what the Americans want. It's plain and clear, plain and simple, no question about it. India does not want to become anyone's vassal. So India is resisting this. Okay? India is resisting. The Americans are pushing for this. So what is the situation? India has recently gone ahead, like we discussed, and signed this framework for an interim trade deal with the US. And the terms we have secured are reasonably good compared to what other US allies have secured. So it's overall good. But what did we have to give up in exchange? One thing is Chabahar. We have walked out of it, it looks like. We have liquidated our stake in the Chabahar port, paid the money to Iran and walked out, it looks like. Yeah. That's one thing. Secondly, it looks like the Americans are insisting that India will not buy any more Russian oil. And the White House put out a different set of different documents in which clause 4 or something says that the US will set up a monitoring situation that will monitor India's activities. And if India resumes any kind of purchase of Russian oil, whether it is direct or indirect, then the Americans will reimpose 25% tariffs on India. So I'm not sure if this was agreed upon in the trade deal. Maybe this is something that's external to the trade deal. But the Americans, once again, are using their leverage upon us. And they are insisting that India will not buy Russian oil anymore. Now the question is, the Indian government is in a dilemma. This was not part of the trade deal, possibly, because the joint statement says nothing about Russian oil. So it looks like this was not part of the trade deal, but the Americans are putting it in through the back door, through something that's external to the trade deal. That they're going to set up a monitoring situation, whatever, monitoring center. They'll monitor Indian activities. Who the hell are they? They are the hegemon of the world. They're the superpower. They can do it. That's the hell who the hell they are, right? So they will do it. And if India purchases even one tanker worth of Russian oil, then 25% tariffs back on India. So that puts India into a very tough situation. What does India do? One thing India can do is stop purchasing Russian oil, but then you lose your so-called strategic autonomy. And it's not exactly vassalhood, but it's one step along the road to becoming a vassal. It's one step. It's not all the way vassalhood. But once you start accepting external pressures as to what you will do, before the 2024 election, parliamentary election, general election, Prime Minister Modi had given a bunch of interviews, right, to various media outlets. In one of these interviews, Prime Minister Modi had said that whatever happens, India does not accept third-party pressure or third-party directions as to what to do in any bilateral relationship. So let's say we have a relationship with, let's say, India and Russia. We will not accept any third-party instructions as to how to behave, like US instructions. That's the kind of thing he had said. And here, if India actually agrees to what the Americans are insisting, then that independence clearly is gone. And now we are, even in Chabahar, the Americans are insisting we stop playing the game. So we've pulled out. Once again, the Americans are deciding what we do. So we are kind of not bending the knee completely, not caving in completely, but we are kind of bowing down to a small extent. And you know what? Maybe it's a temporary thing. Maybe we'll do it for a while, and maybe we will hide our strength and bide our time, like Deng Xiaoping had said for China. So that's a valid strategy in geopolitics. When you are weak, you show that you're weak. And yes, sir, we will do what you say. But don't give up the core red lines of your strategic autonomy and sovereignty. So what's the update on the India-Russia relationship? It remains to be seen. I think the Russians are concerned. The Russians have offered various things to India. They've offered the Sukhoi 57. I'm not sure if it's the best aircraft. Maybe the Rafale is a good idea. I'm not sure if the Rafale deal is the best deal, or maybe it is. I don't know. But the Russians wanted India to go for the Sukhoi 57. We've had issues with Russian equipment in the past, with the MiG-29s and maybe even the Sukhoi 30s, availability of spares and engine serviceability issues and so on. So maybe the Rafale may be actually a better deal compared to the Sukhoi 57. Even the Russians operate only 20 or so Sukhoi 57s. So if it's something the Russians have adopted in large numbers, then we will be confident it's a good plane. So there are issues, so that's why we have gone for the Rafale. The Russians obviously would have preferred we buy their aircraft. They were apparently offering full technology transfer, but once again, we have faced issues with Russia in the past regarding these things, whether it is aircraft carriers, whether it is fighter planes, and so other things. So one has to be careful, right? Overall, I would say the India-Russia relationship is very important for India. India can't afford to, jump into the American lap into the American camp and abandon Russia. Doesn't make sense for India to do that. Uh, of course, the US pressure will be intense. The pressure will be felt by our officials behind the scenes. It will not be visible to us. Mali lithium project, also there is this issue, right? Is there an American angle in there as well? So if this continues, if this pattern continues, then perhaps India-Russia relations may suffer, right? If India genuinely stops purchasing Russian oil, it doesn't look like we have done that so far. But if we are not doing that, then we will see 25% tariffs being slapped back upon us very soon. So we'll have to see. If tariffs aren't slapped by Donald Trump, 25% on India, then it means that India has actually stopped purchasing Russian oil, which will be a significant concession to the Americans. And it will, of course, be a setback for Russia. It will also be, to some extent, a setback to India-Russia relations, right? So I think it's still too early to say whether the Americans have secured this geopolitical victory of forcing India to stop purchasing Russian oil, the way they have forced in the past India to stop buying Venezuelan oil in 2010 or thereabouts, and later Iranian oil. Have they now forced India to stop buying Russian oil? If they have, then it's a significant setback for India and for Russia and for India-Russia relations. I think we need to wait and watch. It's too early to pass judgment on this matter. But it looks like at least some of their pressure is having an effect on India. So let's see. Too early to say. Okay, Mali, right? Samarth Pramanik says, after the Bharat-US trade deal, we are getting signs of Bharat gradually reducing its crude oil imports from Russia. And recently, Bharat exited from Russian-backed lithium project in Mali due to security reasons. Is Bharat now slowly caving into American demands? What's your thought on this matter? Chandrasekhar Biswas says, after India pulled out of the Russia-backed lithium project in Mali over security concerns, are we being pushed towards choosing sides? And from a purely self-interest standpoint, should India leverage its massive market the way China does to extract deeper technology transfers, defense partnerships, and better market access from Russia? Real Vladimir Putin says, what's the possibility of us, India, becoming a US vassal? The government of India has already helped us in Manipur. In the case of Starlink, they are digging their own grave. Even if they are not on foreign payroll, they are making sure that the potential regime change in India by US in the future becomes easy for Americans. So what's going on? So this Mali situation, so India has, a couple of days ago, the news came out that India has pulled out of this project, Russia-backed lithium project in Mali, citing security reasons. The security isn't great and so on. I mean, Russia is there. Russia is not worried about security. How come India is worried about it? India also, one possibility is that India has also discovered its own massive lithium reserves in various parts of India. Why not develop those instead of going and working in Mali? But if you work in Mali with the Russians, then you have access to resources from that part of the world, from that part of Africa, which obviously gives you options. It's called diversification, right? So it makes sense to do that, but India has pulled out of that. So has that happened under American pressure? It's possible. It is indeed possible. See, if it's not happened under American pressure, it's because of security reasons. In that case, it shows that India has no appetite for risk. Geopolitically, you need to have an appetite for risk. The Russians have an appetite for risk. They take big risks in sending their paramilitary forces, etc., in various parts of Africa. There are casualties, there are setbacks, right? These things happen. Your people die sometimes. But the nation, as a whole, Russia, it takes risks, right? China also takes risks, not to the extent that Russia does. So Russia, it is the muscle and China is the money. That's the relationship in Africa. India could, it makes sense for India to also be involved in Africa. But if India has genuinely done this for security reasons, well, it's strange. I mean, we can send our own troops if required, right? Or a paramilitary force, not the official Indian armed forces, or depend on Russian security, which is usually good. So I'm not sure what's happened. If it is because of American pressure, then once again, we are kind of on the road slowly towards a situation where we could potentially be called a US vassal in the future, not right now. Right? So, and maybe it's American pressure, and maybe it's a strategic choice we've taken right now. But right now, we are not strong enough. Let's pull back. That also is a valid choice. It doesn't mean we are vassal today. But if this continues over and over again, if there's a pattern that just goes in a certain direction for a long period of time, for a in a consistent manner, that's when you start becoming a vassal, gradually, slowly. Right now, it's not the case, but yeah, it's concerning to some extent, at least. Um, yeah. So, is Bharat slowly caving into U.S. demands? Looks like there are some indications that to some extent we are accepting American demands. It looks like, possibly, can't say for sure, but it looks like that. I mean, there are no coincidences in geopolitics, right? Pulling out of Chabahar, this Mali thing, the US removing the 25% tariffs on India for purchasing Russian oil, and setting up monitoring of India if India resumes the purchase of Russian oil. All these things form a pattern, at least three data points we have. Let's see if more data points emerge. We'll see about that. So, looks like we are accepting some US demands, possibly. But that doesn't mean that we are a vassal right now. If this continues and it crosses certain lines, then you can say we are on the road to vassalhood. But yeah, you can say these are the first steps in that direction. It doesn't mean we are that. Um, Manipur, yeah, we discussed Manipur. Manipur is a disaster. We don't have any more full sovereignty over Manipur, in my opinion. Okay. Starlink, have been very clear from the very beginning. India should not allow Starlink to operate in India. But looks like we are doing exactly what I have been saying not to do. So we'll see. It's still not operational in India, but looks like we are going in that direction. I hope not. And there are all the various internal issues in India and so on. So yeah, these are those times in the world when everything seems tough. But that's where we are. Okay, RPPL says, do you think India is doing bad in geopolitics? Because first, India doesn't make any irreversible harm to terrorist nation Pakistan during Operation Sindoor, and also did not get any territorial gains. Bangladesh is out of hand to opposite Indira Gandhi separated Pakistan and Bangladesh. So the question is, why is India not doing well in geopolitics? Right? I mean, for some time, for a few years, it was all about the rise of India and all that. Right? India is now respected across the world. When you travel abroad, people see you with respect. And that was a story for a while, wasn't it? And now it looks like everything is going backwards, right? So what's the situation? See, I am a realistic person. I am not a sensationalist. I don't sensationalize things like lots of YouTubers do. All those world war. Whenever I go to as a guest on a podcast, typically I discuss the things I discuss here, but you will see that the title and thumbnail is all about World War III, that sort of thing. So that is called sensationalism. I don't do sensationalism, at least here on this channel. I don't do it anywhere else, but yeah, the title and thumbnail that other people put up, it's not in my control. The point is, I am realistic, and let's discuss this realistically. Is India doing well in geopolitics? Is India doing poorly in geopolitics? I think it's middle ground somewhere. India isn't doing great in geopolitics. India isn't doing great overall, but India is still growing as an economy. India has a lot that's going in its favor, but India has issues. India has various issues. So I always discuss things from the perspective of hard power, power projection, military bases, GDP, and so on. Let's discuss things from a geo-economic perspective, shall we? So, where does India stand in terms of, see, the most powerful countries in the world, they control a number of things in the world, or in some parts of the world at least. They control resources. Resources are the key to everything in geopolitics. They're the key to power. Okay, they control resources. Then they control or own manufacturing. You take those raw materials, raw resources, natural resources, and turn them into finished products. That happens through manufacturing. So you have resources, then you have manufacturing. Then to do manufacturing, you need human capital. You need high quality human beings. Okay? You need intellectual property, the know-how, the technology to convert these raw materials into finished products. Right? So that's human capital, it's intellectual property, it is technology. So you have resources, you have manufacturing, you have human capital, intellectual property, and technology. Then knowledge, the know-how of how to do things. And then at the end of the day, you need money. Your GDP matters, right? What's your GDP? How much are you earning, and how much? What's your gross domestic produce, and so on. So where does India stand in all of this? India is not. I mean, India is a massive land area, right? Subcontinent size thing, land area. So we have plenty of resources, but we don't have the kind of resources that Russia has or Africa has as a whole. We lack certain natural resources, such as oil and gas. We depend on other countries for our energy requirements, right? We import oil and gas from various other nations. We are not self sufficient in terms of energy. We are not energy sovereign. Uh, Other resources, for example, fissile material, uranium, we have to import from other countries, right? Um, we produce most of our own food and so on. So when it comes to resources, the critical things we kind of lack. When it comes to rare earths and lithium and all, we have big resources, but we don't use them. So you see that is a lack of strength. That's a lack of initiative, lack of whatever, but it makes you weaker compared to nations who actually use the resources they have. Then manufacturing, well, where are we on manufacturing? What happened to Make in India? It's going okay. It's not 10 out of 10. It's not 0 out of 10. It's maybe 5 out of 10, right? It's not doing great, but it's not doing very poorly also. Maybe 5 out of 10. But China is like 9.8 out of 10 in terms of manufacturing. The Chinese have done their job. The Chinese also have this lack of resources, at least in terms of energy. But manufacturing, they have mastered it. Human capital, they have really improved their human capital through the education system and through training their citizens in science and technology and manufacturing and all that, engineering, all that. They have acquired all the intellectual property they need, all the technology they need, all the knowledge, the know-how they need. India lags far behind than China in these matters. So resources, India lacks resources. Manufacturing, India is not doing great in manufacturing. We haven't solved our problems. Human capital, abysmal, poor, ridiculously bad, trashy education system. Technology, we still beg for technology. Knowledge and know-how, it's all going out, brain drain, right? When it comes to GDP, we're doing okay, but we are like 1/4 of China, I don't know what of the US. So very fourth largest GDP in the world, but relatively quite small. So these are the issues why India is doing poorly in geopolitics. Okay, it's not just about military strength. It's not just about how many nukes you have. From a military perspective, the Air Force, well, India's Air Force is just slightly ahead of the Pakistani Air Force. Can you believe it? I just don't understand how we have reached the situation. Right? We still import things. We still import Rafales. We've signed a huge deal with the French for Rafales. Missiles, we have some of the best missiles in the world. I hope we have adequate numbers of missiles, maybe tens of thousands of missiles we would need to fight a proper sustained war. I hope we have that. I'm not sure, but let's see. Navy-wise, we have embarked upon a shipbuilding campaign, which is good. Maybe 50 warships are being considered right now. All right. We are lagging behind terribly in submarines, right? Power projection, well, we can't project power even in the subcontinent. The external powers can do regime changes around us, all around us, East Pakistan, West Pakistan, Nepal, etc. We just sit and watch. So we can't even project power in our own neighborhood, in our own backyard, right? Forget about the Indian Ocean region. The Indian Ocean region is our strategic backyard. That's our slogan. But what do we actually do for it to make it happen? Maybe we are kind of working on that. But yeah, the naval power is key to that. We are essentially out of the space race now. The government doesn't seem to think that space is important when everybody else is going to the moon and then to Mars and also in Earth orbit. But we have simply given up, it looks like, the space race. And then we have internal issues in India. I mean, you must have heard me say that the Americans, when they talk about India, their relationship with India, they speak about shared values. That India and the US have shared values. But when the Americans talk about Pakistan, they talk about shared interests. That the US and Pakistan have shared interests. Well, interests always trump values. Do we Indians, 1.4 billion Indians, do we have shared values? Do we have shared interests? Well, the way things are going, different groups have different interests and different values now. And different groups are being pitted against each other within the country. So when this happens, you're going to have internal divisions. The internal divisions were originally created by the Turks and then by the British, but now we are exacerbating that. We are deepening and widening the divisions and the fissures. That's what we are doing. So these are the reasons why India is doing not so great in geopolitics. You see, it's not about Pakistan and the terrorist nation and Operation Sindoor, and obviously all that is also there. These are symptoms, not the actual root causes. You see? So yeah, that's a realistic view of where India stands in geopolitics. Real Vladimir Putin says, what makes the US so powerful that it can intervene militarily anywhere without damaging its economy? Somi says, why does the US have so advanced power projection capabilities? China and Russia also have very strong militaries and are neck to neck in multiple military technologies. Is power projection mostly dependent on military bases overseas? So, why is the US so powerful it can intervene militarily anywhere without damaging its economy? Well, it doesn't intervene somewhere where it has economic interests. If it goes and takes over Venezuela, it actually gains something for its economic interests, right? It actually advances America's economic interests. The Americans will not go and bomb a country that works for them. The US has a very large number of vassals across the world. The Americans will never bomb them or damage those economies. So it will intervene wherever there is no damage to its economy. It will intervene in various parts of the world in such a way that it actually enhances American power projection and American control over the world, right? And why is the US so powerful? Because it has almost global power projection capabilities. It can intervene anywhere on the surface of the planet at roughly 60 minutes notice, intervene militarily, because it has so many, more than probably 800 extraterritorial military bases spread across the world. That is why, right? Why does the US have these advanced power projection capabilities? Because some of the nations we talk about are physically occupied by the US military, like Japan, South Korea, Germany, Italy, etc. In the case of Europe, well, Europe was beggared in the aftermath of the Second World War. The Americans helped rebuild their economy, and in exchange for that, Europe was vassalized, and it was acceptable to the Europeans because the Americans were anyway the most powerful military power in the world at the time. And the Europeans, they were on their knees after the Second World War, and they just accepted whatever terms they got. That's Europe. Then when it comes to West Asia, the so-called Middle East, well, once again, the Americans have entered into various kinds of arrangements with these nations, where the nations get the benefit of American protection in exchange for giving America their oil. So that's a petrodollar system and so on. So power projection is dependent at the bottom of the hierarchy entirely on military power, but it's also about creating economic interdependence. It's also about creating economic dependence more than interdependence. And it's about vassalizing countries in a variety of ways and so on. It's also about having the best technologies and so on. So it's a multiplicity of factors put together that give the US these global, essentially, power projection capabilities. When it comes to China and Russia, they have strong militaries. Okay, sure. Russia has a strong military, but Russia doesn't have this network of vassals anywhere in the world, apart from Belarus, maybe. Yeah, who else? I suppose Belarus. That's about it. Have I missed somebody? Have I missed something? Belarus. Does Russia have extraterritorial military bases, naval in nature? No. It had Latakia. I'm not sure what the situation with Latakia is. What about China? Does China have this sort of thing? A network of vassals? It has North Korea. Iran is an ally, not a vassal. So China has North Korea. That's about it. And China doesn't have extraterritorial naval bases anywhere or military bases outside its territory, apart from maybe Djibouti or maybe one or two things in Madagascar, which are like not really, vassal-like relationships. So China doesn't have anything like what the US has, and that's why the US is so far ahead of everybody else. Vidya Maniyar says, when India will become the most powerful entity in the Indian subcontinent, Pakistan will become irrelevant for us. But right now, Russia is the most powerful. Why does Russia still have to deal with Ukraine? Well, Russia still has to deal with Ukraine because Russia is not the most powerful entity when it comes to Ukraine. See, let's go to the map. It's a great question, actually. It's a great question. Let's understand this in relative terms. So, here's the map. When it comes to the Indian subcontinent, the Americans can do a regime change in Pakistan. They can occupy Afghanistan. They can do a regime change in Nepal. They can do a regime change in East Pakistan. They can play around with Sri Lanka. They can do all these things in India's backyard, and India has to simply watch. And India can't do a thing. India can't stop the US from doing these things. That indicates that in the Indian subcontinent, the US is the most powerful geopolitical actor, not India. So even in the subcontinent, the US is more powerful than India. Okay, that's just a fact of life. So in the future, someday when India becomes more powerful than the US in its neighborhood, that's when Pakistan will naturally disintegrate. But that's someday in the future, if it, whenever it happens. Now, when it comes to, let's say, Western Europe, you see, the most powerful geopolitical entity in Western Europe isn't France, it isn't Germany, it is the US. Okay? The US is the most powerful geopolitical and military entity in Western Europe. When it comes to the borderlands between Western and Eastern Europe, between, let's say, Western Europe and the Russian, the Slavic regions, that's where power overlaps. So Ukraine was kind of neutral for a while, for a long time, until 2014, when the Americans did the Euromaidan coup in Kiev. And that's when Ukraine came under American influence and, you could say, control. And the government the Americans set up in Ukraine, it went ahead and did all these atrocities against the people of Donbass for like close to a decade and so on. And eventually this led to the war. So why did the war happen? Because the American power in Ukraine was becoming greater than Russian power. And this was a red line for Russia. If Ukraine had become a member of NATO, let's say, then you would have had American troops and nukes on Russia's actual borders, and that's why Russia had to go to war. So this tells you that the US is actually more powerful in Ukraine than Russia, because even now Zelensky is in power in Kiev, and he is still getting tremendous amounts of money and arms and ammunition from the West, from mainly the European nations who are doing this at the behest of the US. So it tells you that in Ukraine, the US is more powerful than Russia. You see? So in Ukraine, Russia is less powerful than the US. And that's why the situation called the Ukraine war exists. That is the truth. Mriganka Sekhar Biswas says, what's really behind the oil blockade on Cuba? Another of Trump's Monroe Doctrine impositions. And Somi says, what's going on in Cuba? Why is the US blocking oil shipments to Cuba and trying to strangle its economy? Is an attack on Cuba imminent? What do Americans gain by attacking a small, insignificant nation like Cuba with no natural resources? Let's take a look at the map and see where Cuba is so that we can orient ourselves, and then we shall discuss what is happening vis-a-vis Cuba and the United States. So, Cuba. So we go to the Atlantic Ocean, and Cuba is this island over here. Okay, it was, I think Columbus had at some point in time discovered this island. And Cuba, it's an island in the Caribbean Sea, east of the Gulf of Mexico. And so this is the island. It's not far from Florida at all. If you see the distance, you will see it's hardly 230 to 240 kilometers from the southern tip of Florida. And if we talk about Key West, then it's even closer. So that is Cuba. Now, Cuba has had this government that has been independent and not vassalized by the US for the longest time. I mean, you had the Cuban Missile Crisis when Kennedy was president, right? 1960, what? 62 was the Cuban Missile Crisis. So Cuba at the time was ruled by Fidel Castro. It was aligned with the USSR. And the Soviets had emplaced nuclear weapons and missiles in Cuban territory, and that's why the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. So that goes back to the 1960s, 1962. It's in the 1950s, I believe, that Fidel Castro took over the island, the control of the island, and became the dictator. And he died in the 21st century. His brother Raul Castro became president. Who's the president of Cuba right now? Let's quickly find out who's the president of Cuba. Is it still Raul Castro? Is he alive? Who's the president of Cuba? Let's see. Miguel Diaz-Canel. Okay. Whoever that is. So the deal is that Cuba is an actually independent nation, and it has opposed US vassalhood for the longest time. and it has sided with the USSR in the past. And the Americans now are alleging that Cuba is siding with Russia and China, and also Hezbollah and Hamas and whatnot. So these are the allegations the Americans are making on Cuba. And the Americans are saying that Cuba is now a base from which anti-American activities are being carried out. So Cuba is harboring terrorists, apparently, allegedly, from Hezbollah, Hamas. It's also hand in glove with the Russians and the Chinese to damage American interests. And that's why the Americans say that they have imposed this oil blockade on Cuba. So obviously, if you want to do a regime change, you need a justification for it, right? Even the Americans can't say that, we hate you and we want to just get rid of you. They have to at least, keep up appearances to a certain extent and make some allegations. So the American Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is a child of Cuban immigrants. So a couple of years before Fidel Castro became the president of Cuba, or the dictator of Cuba, Rubio's parents migrated to the US from Cuba. And Rubio and there's this big Cuban American community in Florida. The capital of Florida is Miami. It's a very Cuban city, lots of Cuban origin people there. And these people who have escaped from Cuba over the years and decades, they are strongly in favor of an American mediated regime change operation in Cuba so that Cuba becomes democratic again. So there's a big constituency in Florida of Cuban Americans who support and favor a regime change in Cuba. And even Marco Rubio is in favor of a regime change in Cuba. So that's the political situation. And that's why the Americans have now imposed this oil blockade on Cuba, which is devastating the Cuban economy. There are power shortages and the hospitals have no power. It's possibly a humanitarian crisis and so on. The objective is to demoralize the Cuban government, the Cuban people, and to make it impossible for the government to continue operating. And then when the time is right, swoop in and maybe do a regime change. So that is the objective of the United States. Now, why is the US doing this? Why is the US doing this to a small, insignificant nation with no natural resources? That's the question. It's a good question. Cuba has no major natural resources. Cuba imports oil it used to import oil from Mexico and Venezuela. So Mexico, the Americans arm twisted Mexico, and Mexico stopped exporting oil to Cuba. And then America took over Venezuela. So even that Venezuelan oil that was coming to Cuba has stopped. And now the Americans have imposed a naval blockade on Cuba. So any oil tanker which is going towards Cuba will be stopped and impounded, essentially. So no oil can reach Cuba. So Cuba is now starving of energy. Why? Why is Cuba significant? Obviously, it has no natural resources. So what is the deal? So first of all, back to the map. Cuba it's a big island, and it's a strategically important location, right? Obviously, it's close to the US. The Americans can do whatever they want in this region. And the second thing is obviously the revived Trump-Monroe Doctrine. So Donald Trump has revived the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine is this 1823 foreign policy of the United States, which stated that no European or external power will be allowed henceforth from 1823 onwards to interfere in the internal affairs of any nation in the Americas, whether it is North America, South America, or Central America. Okay? So this foreign policy was adopted by the Americans in 1823. Trump has revived it. Trump says that the US is now going to be the super cop in the Americas, whether it's North, South, or Central America. No external country is allowed to interfere in the affairs of the Americas. Only the US will decide what happens. And not just that, there is a Trump corollary on this, which says that any American nation in the Americas, if it goes against the interests of the US in any way, the Americans will deal with it and take care of it and, essentially deal with it. That's what they've done in Venezuela. So now they're applying it to Cuba. Essentially, what the Americans want is that every single nation in the Americas must be a proper American vassal. There will be no dissent or opposition allowed anymore. So what that tells us is that sooner or later there's going to be a regime change now in Cuba. Cuba has held out for decades. How many decades? 60s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s. That's like 60, 65, almost 70 years they've held out. They've resisted. Looks like now time is up for Cuba. Right? There we are. There we are. Right. Ayush says, US is now talking about Venezuela as if it's an American colony. The world will now purchase Venezuelan oil resources, etc. They boast like it's their own. Is being a small nation a curse? Well, being a small, yeah. So the Americans now own Venezuela. They now own and control Venezuelan oil, right? The Venezuelan government will be allowed to sell oil, but on American terms. So the Venezuelan government will be allowed to sell oil either to American companies or to nations that are approved by the US. And there is talk of Venezuelan oil being sold to India with the American stamp of approval, right? So the Americans now control the fate and the economy of Venezuela. Terrible, isn't it? Terrible, terrible. Yes, sad. Sad and tragic. So is being a small nation a curse? Well, let me show you a small nation. Okay? Let me show you a small nation. And let's decide if being a small nation is a curse. We have this small nation here called the UK. Yeah, the UK. It ruled most of the world a century, 120 years ago. It ruled much of the world. It ruled the whole of India. It ruled much of Africa, much of the world. The sun never set over the British Empire. The UK is a small nation, a small island nation. Is being a small nation a curse? Being a small nation is not necessarily a curse. Just like being a huge nation is not necessarily a boon. So, what is the curse here? Weakness. The greatest sin in geopolitics is weakness. Okay, if you are weak, don't blame others for your misfortunes. Why are you weak? Why have you allowed yourself to be in a situation where you have weaknesses? It's weakness that puts you in these situations. It's weakness that allows others to take advantage of you. The greatest sin in geopolitics is weakness. So, Venezuela, its sin was weakness. If it had acquired somehow, let's say, nuclear weapons or something, then nobody would dare touch it. Look at North Korea, another small nation. Does the US dare bully North Korea? No, it doesn't, right? So, being a small nation isn't a curse. It's not a sin. Being a weak nation is a curse and a sin. The greatest sin in geopolitics. Remember that, my friends. Chandrasekhar Biswas says, now that the BNP, Bangladeshi National Party, has won and Prime Minister Modi was quick to reach out to Tariq Rahman, do you feel India and Bangladesh can truly reset relations after the strain under Yunus, or has too much trust already been lost? Rushabh Tare says, the recent elections in Bangladesh just concluded. BNP clean swept the elections with 2/3 plus majority. Jamaat too made some gains. Tariq Rahman will most likely be the new Prime Minister. Dr. Jaishankar had met him in Dhaka during Khalida Zia's funeral. He is Khalida Zia's son. And Prime Minister Modi too wished him. Has there been something going on between India and the BNP? What do you see ahead for Bangladesh, for India, for Yunus and his aides, and the US? Who has stakes here? Okay. So there's been this election in Bangladesh. And the BNP has won a massive majority, right? 2/3 majority or something like that. And the head of the BNP is Tariq Rahman. He is the son of the late Khalida Zia, the former prime minister of Bangladesh. And Khalida Zia was a 2 or 3-time prime minister of Bangladesh. And so that's the situation. So this guy, Tariq Rahman, is now most likely going to be the new prime minister of Bangladesh. And Dr. Jaishankar was there in Dhaka. He met with this guy when, during the funeral of Khalida Zia, the guy's mother. And the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, has sent out a tweet congratulating Tariq Rahman for his victory. So what's going on? Here's something going on between India and the BNP. Listen, the Bangladeshi elections. You know what kind of elections were held in Bangladesh? Imagine you had elections happening in Nazi-occupied France. France was under Nazi occupation, right? From whatever year to whatever year. 1939, 40 to whatever, until the end of the Second World War, or until the Normandy invasion. France was under Nazi occupation, the Vichy regime, right? So if there was an election in France during Nazi occupation, would you call it a free and fair election? Would you call it a free and fair election in which the major national party is not allowed to stand? Is that a free and fair election? It's not. It's controlled by a foreign occupying force, the Nazis, right? Similarly, the election you had in Bangladesh this time, the Awami League was not allowed to participate. It is a rigged election from the very beginning. It's not a democratic process. And it was held under Mohammed Yunus, who is an unelected dictator or puppet dictator of Bangladesh, right? So the election was rigged from the beginning. And now BNP has won. Now, if the BNP has won, it means they have been allowed to win by the power that controls Bangladesh. Which power controls Bangladesh? The United States. Ever since the coup against Sheikh Hasina happened, the US has been in charge of Bangladesh, right? The Americans effected a regime change in Bangladesh, and they put Mohammed Yunus in the position of chief advisor or whatever the hell he is, right? He's just a puppet, a figurehead. And the army is ruling Bangladesh. So if Tariq Rahman has won and the BNP has won, it's because they have been allowed to win. And most likely they will continue to serve American interests. So just because the Prime Minister has wished this guy, and just because Dr. Jaishankar met him in Dhaka, doesn't mean something is going on between India and this guy, or India and the BNP. Okay? There is no master stroke happening. Maybe relations will be better between India and Bangladesh. Maybe more cordial, more polite relations, less acrimony like we had the past, ever since the coup happened. I mean, this fellow Mohammed Yunus has been putting out these, has been showcasing these books with, Bangladesh capturing, claiming Indian territory, the far east of India, the northeastern states of India, and so on. That's the kind of provocations he's been doing. Maybe with Tariq Rahman, those provocations may cease and the relationship becomes more polite. But it doesn't mean that the relationship improves. Please understand the difference between words and actions. Words can be words don't matter. Words don't matter. The actions is what matters. So the question is, what kind of policies will Bangladesh now have, especially towards India going forward? I very strongly suspect that nothing much will change. Now that Bangladesh now supposedly is back on the democratic train, which it isn't actually, but now we can claim, right? The Americans always do this sham election somewhere or the other, and then they say, okay, everything is fine, and then they control things from behind the scenes. I think that's what's going to happen in Bangladesh. Okay, I don't see any master stroke from India. Yunus, whatever, he may be retired by the Americans or whatever. He may get a nice plum position somewhere in some other country. Maybe he'll move to New York City or something, or maybe he'll stay in Bangladesh as a highly respected Nobel laureate or whatever. It doesn't matter. Yunus is not important. Yunus is not a powerful person. He is not in power. He's simply the face, the figurehead, the puppet. He's not a person of any importance. Okay, so it doesn't matter what happens to Mohammed Yunus. He is anyway not in power. Now there's going to be this Tariq Rahman guy who's going to be in power. It's kind of like Shehbaz Sharif being in power. That's kind of what it's going to be like. So the Indian government may say that, we will better relations and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, the real question is, what kind of policies will Bangladesh adopt? Will they change from the policies we've had in the past year and a half? Will Bangladesh continue to claim Indian territory? Will Bangladesh continue its persecution of Hindus, its massacres of Hindus? Will Bangladesh continue whatever it is doing in the far east of India? Will Bangladesh continue its relationship with Pakistan, with the ISI? These are the questions you should be asking. I think these things will continue. These nice tweets and handshakes and all, they are of no importance whatsoever. So let's wait and watch how this evolves. This guy, Tariq Rahman, becomes the new prime minister most likely. What kind of policies will he adopt? Let's see the next 6 months. I suspect nothing much will change. Maybe the behavior will become more polite, the relationship will become more cordial, But behind the scenes, the same policies will continue. Then what's the big deal? What's the big difference? Nothing. Nothing has changed then. So that's what I think will continue. Rushabh Tare says, your views on the recent election in Japan. The LDP alone secured a two-thirds majority and a plurality in their upper house. So they can constitutionally do anything they want, if they want. My question is, will Madame Sanae Takaichi amend Article 9 and pursue a peaceful as well as nuclear weapon program, which is her agenda, given that her party has a supermajority, or will she face issues like Abe-san? And how does this impact China and India? Okay, so Abe-san wanted Japan to actually amend its constitution and move away from the American imposed pacifism and so on. And we know what happened to Abe-san, sadly, tragically. Now, Madame Sanae Takaichi has won a massive majority, super majority, two-thirds majority. And this gives her the power to amend the Japanese constitution. The Japanese constitution has been in force since 1945. Who wrote the Japanese constitution? The American occupiers of Japan wrote the Japanese constitution. It was not written by the Japanese people. This constitution was written by the Americans. It was imposed upon the Japanese people in the nation of Japan. And since 1945, all the way until today, not one word has changed. The Japanese people have not been allowed to change a single word of the constitution. Now, Madame Sanae Takaichi potentially has the power to do that if she wants. The question is, will she change the constitution? What is Article 9, right? That's the big question here. It's the pacifist article, okay? Article 9 of Japanese constitution, the pacifism clause, the landmark no war clause that legally renounces war as a sovereign right, prohibits the threat of force or use of force to settle international disputes, and pledges not to maintain land, sea, or air forces. And despite this, Japan maintains the self-defense forces for defensive purposes. Key provisions. Clause 1, renunciation of war. Japan permanently renounces war as a sovereign right, which means Japan is no longer a sovereign nation, right? And the threat or use of force as a means of settling international disputes. Second clause, no war potential. Land, sea, and air forces, as well as the other war potential, will never be maintained. Right of belligerency. The right of belligerency of the state is not recognized. So, and so on. So the Japanese government interprets the constitution to allow the maintenance of the SDF for the minimum necessary self-defense, which obviously, works for the Americans because it allows the Americans to counter China. Yeah, that sort of thing. So that's the Article 9. That's Article 9 of the Japanese constitution. Now, Sanae Takaichi could potentially have it changed. Even if she can potentially do it, will she actually do it? Will she amend Article 9 and say that Japan now has the right to fight war, to wage war? In my opinion, she will do it if the Americans allow it. Does it make sense for America to turn Japan into a different kind of country now? A country that can actually initiate warfare again for the first time since the 1940s. Does it make sense for the Americans to allow Japan to do that? And does it make sense for the US to allow Japan to have nuclear weapons? Maybe it does. Maybe it's time to counter China more vigorously, more robustly. So if the Americans are concerned about China and China's potential to take Taiwan or potential to do whatever mischief in the region, then the Americans could allow Sanae Takaichi to do these things. The point is, if Sanae Takaichi decides to do something unilaterally, she will face problems. She will face issues. But if she does this with the approval of the US behind the scenes, then it will go smoothly. It's, I think, likely that the nation of Japan will have nuclear weapons by 2027-28. Most likely. I think it's likely. And I've spoken about this on multiple occasions. I say this because one of the reasons I say this is because Henry Kissinger, the great man, had predicted the year he died, 2023, that Japan will most likely have nuclear weapons in 5 years. And the guy knew what he was talking about. So that's one indicator that this could happen. So I think Sanai Takaichi may be empowered by the Americans if they think it makes sense for Japan to become a more robust and more vigorous and more proactive counterforce, counterbalance to China. In that case, they will allow it. What does it mean for China and India? Obviously, it is bad for China. The Japanese SDF, self-defense forces, are very capable. Very capable. The Japanese submarines are scary. The Chinese are scared of Japanese submarines. The Japanese Soryu class submarines are some of the best in the world. The Soryu class submarines that the Japanese Navy has decommissioned are better than the existing Indian Navy submarines. Their decommissioned submarines are better than India's active submarines. And imagine how good the active Soryu class submarines will be, right? So the Japanese Navy, the Japanese submarines are overall tremendously powerful. China is really concerned about Japan's military capabilities, the way things stand as of today. So if Japan goes ahead and amends the article, maybe removes the Article 9 of the Constitution and goes nuclear, that's going to be tremendously concerning for China. For India, good for India actually if that happens. Good for India. Real Vladimir Putin says, do you think China has an upper hand in this Cold War because of their industrial complex and education system? Educational standards have declined significantly in the US, though far better than India. I suppose when you say Vishwaguru, I suppose you're saying India. And China probably has the best education system in the world. What are my thoughts? Okay. Do I think China has an upper hand in the Cold War because their industrial complex, because of their manufacturing overcapacity, their high-tech, manufacturing capabilities, and their education system? Clearly, these things, these factors, these are massive factors when it comes to where a nation stands in any kind of geopolitical race. So, like I explained earlier, there are multiple factors that go into these things. You need to have resources, right? China has lots of resources, but it lacks some resources, like oil and gas, that it lacks. It also lacks various critical minerals and so on, which it acquires from Africa and other countries. China has the best manufacturing industrial capacity in the world, the best manufacturing in the world. China is neck to neck with the US in terms of various technologies. The Chinese have really invested in human capital, in their education system, the technology which allows them to develop high tech products, the knowledge they have. So unless you invest significantly in education, in science, technology, engineering education, medicine education, you won't be able to become a major industrial power. So the Chinese probably, like you say, I agree with you, probably have the best education system in the world now. They have invested trillions of dollars into their education system since the 1980s and 1990s, and it has genuinely bore fruit for the Chinese. So the Chinese, well, one must salute them, one must commend them for what they've achieved. They've put in the work, they've put in the money, and they've, over the years, step by step, improved their education system to a place where today it is world class, probably the best in the world. So because of this tremendous human capital quality that the Chinese have, the best education system, tremendous human capital, tremendous manufacturing capabilities, which obviously transforms or translates into military manufacturing also, right? The Chinese are able to now manufacture jet engines and fifth and sixth generation fighter planes. They're improving the submarines. So obviously this goes into the military sphere as well. So in some of these matters, the Chinese have the upper hand of the US. When it comes to AI, they're neck to neck with the US. When it comes to certain technologies, they're slightly behind, but not very far behind, right? So that's the situation, right? So yeah, they are ahead they are ahead or neck to neck with the US in these things. So does this mean that the Chinese have an upper hand in the Cold War? Well, not quite. The Chinese don't have any power projection capabilities. They have no vassals. That's where the US is far ahead of China. The US is also far ahead of China in terms of the space race, way ahead of China. The Americans can deploy hundreds, thousands of satellites, right? The American government has possibly about 10,000 satellites in orbit of various kinds. A lot of these are military satellites and spy satellites, right? And the Americans have like 40,000 or so Starlink satellites, which may also double up as surveillance equipment, possibly, right? So that's where the Americans have an unmatched advantage. The Chinese are doing their best to replicate, you know, uh, controlled landing technologies and reusable rocket technologies, and they are doing good in this. India is not even participating in the race. The Chinese are trying to catch up with the US, but they are still behind in these matters. But when it comes to power projection, the Americans have an unmatched capability. The Chinese can't even dream of the kind of power projection the Americans have, and the kind of the number of vassals the Americans have. In terms of nuclear capabilities, the Chinese are far behind. I suspect, possibly, but once again they are trying their best to narrow the gap. So, because of these factors, the Americans significantly have a significant upper hand in this Cold War, right? And the main issue is that the Chinese are not self-sufficient in terms of energy, and the Americans can control the energy flows around the world, and that is one of the Achilles heels of China. The China can weaponize its control over the rare earths exports and rare earth magnets and so on. So it has leverage over the US, which it has built up, yeah, overall over the years through hard work, unlike India. So the Chinese have some leverage over the US, but the US has way more leverage over China. And overall, the US is still significantly ahead of China in this Cold War. But AI could be the game changer. We'll see about that. Brown Leprechaun says the US couldn't even defeat the Houthis in 7 months. Why do they think they will be able to defeat Iran? Okay, let's go to the map and understand what we are discussing here. Where is map? Is here. So here's the map, and we're talking about Yemen. So the Houthis are the Ansar Allah faction in Yemen, and they oppose the US. They are aligned with Iran. They used to be aligned with Syria, but Syria has fallen now. And they are also aligned with, you could say, Lebanon and Hezbollah. So Syria has fallen. Bashar al-Assad no longer rules Syria. There's an ISIS terrorist who rules Syria now. Julani is an American vassal. So that's the situation. Now, the Houthis, going back to the map, they oppose the US, and they have reasonably high quality missiles. And using that, they have from time to time blockaded the Strait of Bab al-Mandeb, this narrow geographical choke point that connects the Red Sea with the Gulf of Aden that opens up into the Indian Ocean, the Western Indian Ocean, the so-called Arabian Sea. So the Houthis have been able to blockade the Strait of Bab al-Mandeb from time to time. And since 2024, the Americans have they have launched hundreds of airstrikes at the Houthis, and still the Houthis exist. They haven't been regime changed out of existence, right? The Houthis are still in control of northern Yemen, at least. The Americans haven't been able to dislodge them from power and place somebody else in power, right? The Americans have also used local allies in this this conflict against the Houthis, most notably Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And the Saudis in the UAE were in this coalition, which was fighting against the Houthis the past 10 or so years, right? And still, the Houthis are still in power in northern Yemen. The Americans have launched hundreds of airstrikes on them, and they have been able to partially end the blockade of the Strait of Bab al-Mandeb, maybe fully also at times, but they haven't been able to regime change the Houthis. Now, here's the thing. The Americans never actually seriously tried to end the rule of the Houthis. They never actually launched a land invasion. It was just airstrikes and drone strikes and so on to ensure that the strait is open. That's it. The Americans have never gone in militarily the way they went into Iraq or something, right? 2023 Iraq, the American invasion of Iraq, the 2003 invasion of Iraq, or the invasion of Afghanistan that the Americans did. This sort of thing the Americans have never attempted in Yemen. So they haven't really tried to do a regime change in Yemen. They've used their allies like Saudi Arabia and the UAE to offset the Houthis in Yemen. And of late, there have been frictions between the Saudis and the UAE as well, because of diverging geopolitical objectives, which is a different story entirely. So the US hasn't really seriously tried to defeat the Houthis since 2024. They haven't really seriously tried it. They've simply tried to suppress their capabilities so that the strait remains open. So that's the deal. So does this indicate the Americans won't be able to defeat Iran? It doesn't indicate that. Defeating Iran will be a monumental task. It will be very difficult, and it will be very costly, very expensive, very time consuming, and it may even lead to setbacks, at least temporary setbacks. But the Americans do have the firepower to defeat Iran if they decide to go all in. It will be much more difficult than the American invasion of Saddam Hussein's Iraq. It will be much more difficult and much more expensive, much more time consuming. But the Americans can do it if they are serious about it. They can. This is Harsh Kapoor says, in an era where economies, militaries, and civilian life are deeply dependent on space-based infrastructure, does the weaponization of satellites represent a more immediate and systemic threat to global stability than nuclear weapons? And should international law evolve to treat large-scale satellite attacks as acts equivalent to strategic nuclear aggression? Okay, so ASAT warfare you're talking about, right? And the weaponization of satellites. So when it comes to the modern economies, the world economy, it's all interconnected, right? When it comes to military matters, when it comes to civilian life, all of these domains, all of these are deeply integrated with satellites for a variety of things, right? Communications. We are communicating right now. Much of that, depending on where you are, will be happening through satellite. We depend on satellites for communications, for navigation, for timing. For militaries, depend on satellites for intelligence, for missile warning, for early missile warning systems. We depend on satellites for finance, for logistics, and so many things. So if satellites are weaponized or satellites are disrupted, then let's say a small number, relatively small number of key satellite systems are disrupted in some ways. So this could paralyze banking systems. This could paralyze air traffic management systems. It could paralyze large parts of the internet. It could also paralyze the command and control structures of various militaries, right? So space systems, satellite infrastructure, these are critical infrastructure now. These are now treated as critical infrastructure. And these are fragile systems, right? So that is the situation. Now, what do we mean by weaponized satellites? You're asking about weaponized satellites here. So how do you weaponize satellites, or how do you bring satellites into the domain of warfare? So one way of doing that, military means, is ASAT weapons, anti-satellite weapons. Ground launched missiles or air launched missiles, which will intercept a satellite in orbit and destroy it. So that's a kinetic ASAT weapon, anti-satellite weapon. So these weapons physically destroy satellites, and they create a profusion of debris, which is a disaster. Then you also have non-kinetic tools, non-kinetic means of disrupting satellites, like jamming, like spoofing, dazzling or blinding of sensors, cyber attacks against satellites, or cyber attacks against the ground station that controls the satellite, or interfaces with the satellite. This sort of thing. These are non-kinetic tools, right? And you also have concepts of nuclear armed satellites. I mean, if you watch James Bond movies from the 1980s and 1990s, in the 20th century, there are concepts of nuclear armed satellites. And we've had space-based nuclear detonations. The Americans and the Russians both have, tested nuclear weapons in orbits, in orbit, in Earth orbit. So if you have a nuclear detonation in orbit today, and depending on where the detonation happens, it can disable entire constellations of satellites, right? So clearly, space is now on the verge of being weaponized. We certainly have the means and the tools for doing that. So overall, the weaponization of satellites is, you could say, it's a risk multiplier. It's a systemic risk multiplier. It is a systemic risk multiplier for nuclear danger. It's not a separate threat. It's not a higher order threat. It's a risk multiplier for nuclear danger. So if there's an attack on satellite infrastructure, this will obviously disrupt, like I said, global finance, navigation, communications. It will create systemic shocks, economic shocks, political shocks, and this will happen without ever crossing the nuclear threshold. Yeah, uh, it will make it harder for militaries to monitor what their adversaries are doing. If there are agreements between two nations, maybe arms control agreements, if satellites are taken out of service, out of commission, then you'll not be able to monitor and enforce arms control agreements or whatever. So if this happens, if satellites are taken out, if space is weaponized, this will increase opacity during a time of crisis, the fog of war, like they say, friction. And this will have the effect of raising the possibility, the probability that nuclear weapons could be used either in confusion or in panic. So nuclear weapons are still way more dangerous than satellites, and the weaponization of satellites and weaponization of space. So, so the weaponization of satellites is still, not the most dangerous thing in the world. It's a risk multiplier. Nuclear weapons remain the most decisive existential danger for human beings. They remain the most decisive existential danger for the planet. Satellites are a separate thing. They are connected, but they are different. And today, if you have nuclear weapons deployed in space, or nuclear operations in space, that kind of blurs the line between a space war and a nuclear war. And so that's where we are. So I would not say that international law can evolve to, probably, you can't really treat large scale satellite attacks as something that's equivalent to strategic nuclear aggression. But the lines are blurring now because it's all interconnected. So it's a strategic risk multiplier. It's a systemic risk multiplier. Divodas Putra says, at one point last year, you had said that tribalism and civilization are opposites. Okay. I have thought a lot about that statement. You have said that rise in tribalism is a sign of decay of civilization. Yeah, isn't it? Oh, okay. I don't know if you have followed Balaji's work, but Balaji has shown with examples how the US is becoming more tribal in terms of red tribe versus blue tribe. How they don't marry into each other. They don't go to each other's schools. They don't want to live in the same city. So you have blue cities and red cities, right? Now, combining these thoughts, is it fair to say that civilization in the US in particular, is in decay? And some of the geopolitical churns we are witnessing could be because of that. I know that still have phenomenal amount of hard power. So yes, I must have said this. I don't remember, but I must have said it, that tribalism is the enemy and the opposite of civilization. Tribalism, what is tribalism? It means that within a civilization, you have these special interest groups that emerge who have shared interests that are opposite to the interests of a different group. Think about India. Do we have categories of people in India who are pitted against each other? Some people get more rights, and some people are portrayed as permanent oppressors, and some people are permanent victims. Right? So some groups have shared interests, and other groups have shared interests, and these interests are opposing forces, right? So this is called tribalism. In India, reservation is creating tribalism, isn't it? So that is going to destroy the civilization if it continues. So tribalism is the enemy of civilization. Tribalism eventually causes the collapse of civilization. I don't know what the government of India is doing. Is the government of India intending to destroy India's civilization? That's the question, right? Anyhow, so that's the deal with tribalism. Now, I'm not sure about what Balaji has said, but the US is indeed becoming more tribal. Red versus blue, right? Yeah, they don't marry among each other. They don't go to each other's schools. They don't live in the same city, and so on. So yeah, there is increasing tribalism in the US. The US society, you could say, is kind of declining because of all these things. Now, so therefore, is it correct to say that civilization is declining and decaying in the US? Well, I have never seen the US as a civilization. Was Rome a civilization? Rome was not a civilization. Rome was an empire. It was the most powerful entity in west of Suez, more or less, wasn't it? For like a couple of centuries, or 2.5 centuries or so. So Rome was not a civilization. It absorbed elements of various civilizations, including Greek civilization, Egyptian civilization, and so on. Maybe even Celtic elements, but overall it was an empire. It was not a civilization. The United States is very much like a modern day Rome. It's not a civilization, it's an empire. So I have never seen the US as a civilization. They like to talk about Western civilization, whatever that is. I don't know what Western civilization is. The West itself in the past 500 years has been an imperialistic force, an imperialistic set of entities, whether it's the Portuguese or the Spanish or the French or the English, and now the Americans. These are imperialistic entities, and these are empires that rose and fell. So the US is an imperial entity. It's not a civilization. And overall society in the US is indeed decaying and declining, right? There's more tribalism. There are all these divisions in the US being exacerbated by politicians and so on. So yes, we are indeed seeing the slow, gradual decline and decay of American society. I agree with that. They still have a phenomenal amount of hard power. You are absolutely right. I agree with you. But I don't see the US as a civilizational entity. I see it as an imperial entity, and that's where I differ. Rinigan says, in one of your interviews by Adi Achint, you mentioned that the Shans are mostly Baptist today, but they are the ones who brought Vishnu idol to Manipur in the 15th century. The place where the temple is built is called Bishnupur. Bishanpur it used to be called. Now it's Bishnupur. Okay. And thus came Vishnupriya. Well, the Vishnupriyas are not really. Are they really Meiteis? Are they really Manipuris? They claim they are the original ones, but I'm not sure about that at all. Anyhow, Bishnupur, right. The Shans were known as Pongs by the Meitei kings. In The Twilight of Burma, there's this movie, right? The Austrian lady who married the Shan king was named Mahadevi. Why didn't India capitalize on its roots in the Shan state? Manipur shared borders with Thailand. Yeah, correct. So going back to the map, where's the map? Here's the map. Shan state, right? Northern Burma. So we're talking about northern Burma here, Shan state. And that used to be obviously a Vaishnavite region. And the kingdom of Manipur was much, much larger in the past. Whereas, the king of Manipur had captured Mandalay as well at one point in time. Long story. So it was a much, much larger entity, Manipur. And Shan state was a neighboring kingdom. And today, the people who live in the erstwhile Shan state are mostly Baptist Christians who have been converted to Christianity by American missionaries in the past century or so, similar to what happened in India's Far East, again done by American missionaries with the help of Mr. Nehruji in the past 100 years or so. So now coming back to your question, so the kingdom of Manipur in the Shan kingdom had good relations. And the Shan king brought a Vishnu statue, Murti, to Manipur in the 15th century. And eventually Manipur adopted the path of Vaishnavism. The kings did that. And eventually the whole of Manipur became Vaishnavite, syncretized with the original polytheistic culture, Sanamaism, which is called Sanamaism in English. So we had this, right? Shan state was Hindu. Today it's Baptist. So the question at the end you're asking is a pertinent question. Why didn't India capitalize on its roots in Shan state? Civilizational and cultural roots in Shan state. Manipur shared a border with Thailand. See, if you look at the geography, okay? Let's go back to the map. Shan state was Hindu. Myanmar was Hindu and Buddhist, originally Hindu. Thailand was Hindu. Thailand still has lots of Hindu elements. Their kings are still called King Rama of the Chakri dynasty, right? Singapore, Hindu. Malaysia used to be Hindu. Indonesia was all Hindu. The Philippines were Hindu. Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, all were Hindu. You had Hinduism all the way to the Philippines. Tibet was Buddhist. Gandhar was Hindu. We had Indian roots all over the place, right? So the question is, why didn't India capitalize on its civilizational and cultural roots in Shan state? Well, I can give you the example of Tibet. Tibet, when India became independent in 1947, was an independent entity. It should have been India's protectorate. Tibet was part of the Indosphere. But what did we do? We handed Tibet on a plate to China. When the Chinese troops started starving because it was so far from China, the government of India sent thousands of tons of rice to the Chinese soldiers. That's how we dug our own grave and ended our civilizational existence in Tibet. After 1947, the governments of India have been Hindu-phobic governments, secular governments. Anything that has anything to do with money with Hinduism is anathema. Hinduism evil, Hinduism bad, Hinduism backward, Hinduism regressive. Let's not have anything to do with Hinduism. That's been the policy of every successive government of India after 1947. Right? So that's why India did not capitalize on its cultural and civilizational roots in Shan state. I mean, nations like Burma, like Thailand would have been very happy to have had India as the protector, the military protector of the region, but India did not want to play the role. And that's why the US had to step in. We just opened up the space. If we ceded the space to the US, right? In 1947, India had the most powerful navy in Asia. Do you know that? What on earth did the governments of India do after 47? I really wonder. So India simply abandoned its children. India switched off its civilizational status. India reduced itself to a nation state. Forget about Shan state, forget about Thailand. How did India treat the states in the Far East, the Far Eastern regions, Manipur, Nagaland, etc.? Stepmotherly treatment. Nehru opened up the whole place for Christian missionaries, Baptist missionaries, and shut the door for all Hindu and Indic religions. The consequence of this is that in a few decades, the whole region was civilizationally destroyed, culturally destroyed. The beautiful indigenous culture of Nagaland destroyed. Much of Manipur destroyed. Arunachal, it's happening now. It's still happening. It's not like it's from the days of Nehru. It's still happening, by the way. Still happening. So India failed to capitalize on its civilizational roots even in India. So this all boils down to a lack of leadership or a lack of quality leadership. It's tragic what India has done to itself and still continues doing. Real Vladimir Putin says, what's the possibility of Doval sir taking over India the way Putin took over Russia? Okay. What is Doval sir's age today? Must be 80, 81, 82. Let's find out. Okay. Must be in the early 80s, maybe 82, 83. Ajit Doval age. What's his age? 81 years old. Okay. Vladimir Putin age in 1999. How old was he? 47. Vladimir Putin was a young man. In political terms, he was a young man. 47 is young for a politician. He was a young man when he took over the reins of Russia in 1999. 47. Ajit Doval, sir, is 81 years old today. 81. When do you expect he may have the chance to take over? He may be 83, 84, 85 at the time. Do you want a leader of India who's 85 years old? Mr. Ajit Doval is a great man. He has had a legendary career, an incredible career. Someday the truth of all his great actions will come out, maybe in a few decades when it is declassified. That's how great he is. But he is in his 80s now. Do we want leaders who are in their 80s? Isn't it better to have leaders who are much younger? Right? Maybe in their 40s or 50s. Maybe 40s is a little Too young, perhaps, for politics. Maybe 50s. So I think that may not be a very viable possibility. I'm not sure if Mr. Dowal even wants to take over in that sense, I don't think that is his calling in life. He would know better than me, obviously. I'm just guessing here, but I think it is unlikely. You see? And again, he's not a politician, right? He's not a politician. Do you see Mr. Dowal standing for election and all that? Campaigning? No, man. I'm not sure that is the path he would like to take. Amisha Mishra says, is the younger Dryas theory a real thing? So, what is this younger Dryas theory? First of all, there is a set of events that actually happened, and then there's a theory. So, what is the set of events that actually happened? So, about 12,900 years before today, there's a sudden onset of cold weather all across the planet. Sudden ice age. Okay, see, let's find out the last glacial minimum. Last glacial minimum. Last glacial maximum. The last glacial maximum was about 29 to 19,000 years ago. The coldest, most intense phase of the last ice age, featuring maximal global ice sheet expansion. Glaciers covered about 8% of Earth's surface, 25% of land, and so on. The sea levels dropped by 120 meters compared to what we have today. The world was significantly colder, and so on and so forth. So the last glacial maximum was between 29,000 to 19,000 years ago. Average temperature. What was the average temperature in the planet? 8 degrees Celsius was the average global temperature. Okay, so that is the last glacial maximum. Now, what about the younger Dryas period? That's about 12,900 years ago. Period. Okay, 12,900 to 11,700 years ago. About 1,000 or 1,300 years it lasted. Okay, average temperature. So the average temperature at that time, what was the average temperature? Okay, it's showing you how much it fell. So in Greenland, the temperature fell by about 10 degrees Celsius. Imagine a drop of 10 degrees Celsius. And the northern hemisphere annual temperatures dropped by about 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. So this younger Dryas period was a period of about 1,000 years, 1,300 years, beginning 12,900 years before today, where the global temperatures abruptly dropped. Abruptly, sudden drop across the world. Maybe in the northern hemisphere, where we live, most of us, it was 3 to 5 degrees Celsius kind of drop. In Greenland, it was about 10 to 13 to 15 degrees of drop in temperature. That's massive drop of temperature. And this happened abruptly. It lasted for about 1,000 or 1,300 years, and then it disappeared abruptly. So, for these temperatures fell in a period of about 50 to 70 to 100 years. In just about 1 century, the temperatures dropped that much. Then this period lasted for about 1,000 or 1,300 years, and then about 30 to 50 years, the temperatures went back to normal. So that is the younger Dryas period. Now the question, so it actually did happen. The question is, how did it happen? What was the causative factor or set of causative factors? That is the question, and that's where the controversy arises. So I'm not sure what the officially accepted consensus is as to the causative factors for the younger Dryas cooling of the Earth. But there's another theory. The theory is that there was an impact event, maybe an asteroid or a comet that hit the Earth, or maybe broke into pieces and hit multiple parts of the Earth and multiple air bursts and all that. And maybe a lot of dust and soot was pushed up into the atmosphere, which cooled the planet for about 1,000 or so years. That's a theory. That's the younger Dryas impact theory. And it's been put forth by people like Graham Hancock. Younger Dryas impact theory. The question is, what evidence do we have that such an impact happened? Maybe a cometary impact or an asteroid impact. Did we have single impact? Did we have multiple impacts? Sometimes comets and asteroids break up and they hit you in multiple places. That sort of thing also happens. So do we have any evidence of an impact event? There's this Greenland impact crater that's been discovered recently. So Greenland crater, younger. Yeah, so it kind of dates to that time. 31-kilometer wide Hiawatha crater, initially suspected, blah, blah, blah. It's okay, it happened 58 million years ago. Oh, well, that's tragic. It's 58 million years older than the Younger Dryas thing. Okay, so I remember seeing this news that there's this crater that's been discovered in Greenland that kind of could prove the Younger Dryas impact theory. But now I didn't look it up until now. So it's 58 million years old. Well, that's sad. So I'm not sure if there's any evidence that corroborates this theory, the Younger Dryas impact event theory. So most scientists and researchers do not treat this theory very seriously, primarily because of a lack of evidence that supports it. But it's still theoretically possible. So maybe the impact craters are hiding somewhere. Maybe we haven't discovered them or something. That's also a possibility. But in the absence of the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but we need to have evidence before we take a theory seriously, and we don't have it right now. And there are some other pieces of evidence, very circumstantial evidence. There is Gobekli Tepe, a swarm of planets kind of thing. Okay, Gobekli Tepe, the carvings there, cometary swarm. Let's see. Ancient carvings on Pillar 43 are interpreted as a record of a devastating comet swarm impact about 10,850 BC. Younger Dryas thing. Okay, let's see Pillar 43 at Gobekli Tepe. Gobekli Tepe. What's it look like? So do we see a swarm of comets? I can see a scorpion. Do I see a swarm of comets? I'm not sure if I see a swarm of comets, but I don't know. Maybe some people see that. So it's a very circumstantial, far-fetched kind of thing, but some people interpret that pillar as some kind of record of a swarm of comets appearing and impacting the Earth and setting off the Younger Dryas period. But clearly, that's just very, very circumstantial and very far-fetched. Can't be taken as proof. Okay. Nirvana Shanks says, what specific economic and political reforms did Deng Xiaoping introduce to start the rise of modern China? A relevant question. Very relevant question. Important question. What policies did Deng Xiaoping create? Which did he abolish or modify? And how did these changes transform the Chinese economy and society? What major challenges did he face from within the party, the bureaucracy, and society at large? And how did he overcome them to establish the path that led to China's global emergence? Thank you for your attention to this matter. So the amount of questions you packed into this one comment, to answer them satisfactorily and properly, it would take me probably several hours to go into all of this in detail. So how about I give you the top three, policies of Deng Xiaoping that contributed to China's rise, the rise of modern China. So Deng Xiaoping comes to power, 1978? When did he come to power? Late 70s, probably 78, 79. Deng Xiaoping, when did he when did he come to power? Deng Xiaoping, 1977. Okay. And he became the paramount leader of China in December 1978. Okay, so that's when Deng Xiaoping became the paramount leader of China, 1978. So the first thing he did, see, before 1978, China was a proper communist nation. It was a collectivized economy. Everything was collectivist in nature. Farming was a collective enterprise, right? So after Deng Xiaoping came to power, he dismantled collective farming. Okay. See, in collective farming, everything was owned by the state. Individuals owned nothing, families owned nothing. They did not own the land. They did not own their own household, their own house. They did not own the produce of the farmland. They owned nothing. The state owned everything. The farmers, the peasants were simply, essentially peasants or slaves who were owned by the Chinese Communist Party. So from the time Deng Xiaoping came to power, he almost immediately dismantled collective farming. He gave limited land use rights to individual farmers and their families, right? And they were mandated to deliver a certain quota of agricultural produce to the state. And they were allowed to keep the surplus or even sell the surplus. So that's a transformative reform in China. Okay. So before that, everything they produced was had to be given to the state. And then they would be given a certain amount of whatever produce to stay alive, to survive. And that's why we had these horrific things like the famines that Mao engineered in his great leap forward in the Green Revolution and whatnot. So Deng Xiaoping gave farmers the right to uh, keep the surplus after they delivered the quota to the state. And the Chinese and Deng Xiaoping made rural markets legal again. So farmers could set up markets and sell the produce to whoever wanted to buy it, So and they could keep the profits, they could keep the money, that sort of thing. So because of this, this incentivized farmers to grow more and to produce more. So grain output shot up, the income of farmers that also shot up. It rose significantly by the early 1980s. The chronic food shortages that plagued China and caused the horror famines of the Mao Zedong era, those chronic shortages of food, those ended. And over time, this had the effect of creating a large rural purchasing power capability. They could start purchasing things. They could become consumers over time. So and because of this, farmers were also allowed to diversify into cash crops and activities that were non-farming activities. So this eventually gave rise to various kinds of small cottage industries and enterprises. Eventually, the whole countryside became gradually industrialized. It absorbed the surplus labor. So this was the first major reform that I can think of from Deng Xiaoping. The second big reform was the open door policy that Deng Xiaoping implemented. So 1969, China and the USSR almost go to war. The USSR decides to nuke China. The Americans save China. The US then has this détente with the Chinese. Nixon and Kissinger come to Beijing and meet Mao Zedong and so on. And eventually, by the late 1970s, the Chinese under Deng Xiaoping decide to open up their economy gradually, very, very cautiously, like lab experiments. Okay, what lab experiments? Special economic zones, SEZs, and this policy was called the open door policy. So early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, under Deng Xiaoping, China created the first special economic zones like Shenzhen. Shenzhen is very famous today, right? But they had many of these more, Xiamen, Shenzhen, and so on. And in these special economic zones, which are like walled off from the rest of the country, essentially, China offered tax breaks and flexible labor rules and significant autonomy to investors to attract FDI, foreign direct investment. And the objective was to, over time, create an export-oriented economy. So eventually, in the mid-80s, this was extended to multiple port cities. Eventually, entire coastal belts became, SEZs, and some border areas like Shenzhen, like border with Hong Kong. So these parts of China became labs, laboratories for market practices, for tech transfer, for joint ventures with foreigners, and so on. And very rapidly, most of the FDI coming into China came into these SEZs. Okay, and so these special economic zones became hubs for manufacturing, for migration from rural areas, because people in rural areas who were until then farmers, they wanted to have a better life, they wanted to have higher incomes. So they started migrating to these special economic zones, many of these coastal cities and so on. And eventually you had the rise of consumer culture in China, and obviously you would have inequalities. So the people in these special economic zones became wealthier than the rural Chinese and so on. So it created inequalities in China. But this brought China into the global US-led system, the global production networks, the global supply chains, and so on. So that's another big reform of Deng Xiaoping. That's two. Let's do one more. One more. The one child policy, transformative reform, right? So this was social engineering. Um, so Deng Xiaoping launches all these major reforms, right? Wants to transform the economy. But then he says that, the economy won't do so well unless we restrain population growth. China's population was already in excess of 1 billion or something, right, at the time. So they needed to, Deng Xiaoping decided we have to restrain population growth. Maybe the Westerners put that in his ears or whatever. So that's why he instituted the one child policy. The objective was to restrain population growth. The objective was to raise per capita income and per capita resource availability. And these were, from Deng Xiaoping's perspective, essential to China's modernization. Obviously, he's gone now, and now China is suffering the ill effects of the one child policy. But it is what it is. He saw it as something that was good for China. So these are some of the reforms that Deng Xiaoping produced, and rapid reforms. The rapid reforms had some unintended consequences. There was inflation, there were layoffs in various state-run industries. Corruption apparently rose, became visible. There was inequality in income gaps among the population of various parts of the country. Eventually, some people became unhappy with this. There were, as some Chinese people became more prosperous, they started demanding political liberalization, democracy. It eventually led to what happened in 1989, nationwide protests in China, but it centered on Tiananmen Square in Beijing, right, where students and various other Chinese citizens demanded, political reform, democracy, accountability, anti-corruption, all that. And obviously, then Xiaoping said that was too far. They had gone too far, and that's why there was a military crackdown, and one-party rule was preserved. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, three of the major reforms that Deng Xiaoping did. If I were to go into all the reforms, I would have to read a few books first of all, and explaining all of that would take several hours or maybe a whole semester, possibly, if I was to do justice to it. So that's kind of the impact Deng Xiaoping had on China. A transformative figure for sure. He did good, he did bad also. The one-child policy in retrospect, if you look back from today's perspective, it's been a disaster for China. But China wouldn't be where it is today if Deng Xiaoping had not unleashed all those reforms back in the day, in the late 70s and early 80s. Right. Amisha says, why didn't the Ottomans assimilate Egypt and other such areas into Turkish culture? To what extent was Turkish spoken in the Ottoman Empire? So, Turkish, first of all, let us define Turkish. There were various varieties of Turkish. There were various Turkic dialects. So, in various parts of what is now Turkey, you had various dialects and various forms of Turkish or Turkic languages that were spoken. And there was something called Ottoman Turkish, which was the Turkish language spoken in the Ottoman court, the court language. And that was a mixture of Turkic plus Persian plus Arabic, all combined together into one new form of the language called Ottoman Turkish, which is the origin mostly of today's Turkish language. So that was the Ottoman Turkish language. Now, when the Ottomans absorbed all these other territories like Egypt, like Syria, like Iraq, etc., into their empire, they absorbed territories that spoke different languages. So Egypt had been ruled by the Mamluks from the 13th century all the way to the 16th century. It was in the 16th century, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the Ottomans conquered Egypt. Ottoman conquest of Egypt. Ottoman conquest of Egypt. 15 something, right? 1517. 1517. Okay. So that's the 16th century. The Mamluk Sultanate, Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt begins in the 13th century, right? 13th century. Okay, 1250 to 1517. So 13th century, right? So the Mamluk Sultanate had thoroughly Islamized and Arabized Egypt. So by the time the Ottomans conquered Egypt, the Mamluk Sultanate had been in power for about 250 years, more than 250 years. And Egypt was thoroughly Islamized and Arabized. So the entire society of Egypt spoke Arabic, and the leadership structure and the bureaucracy and administrative structure of Egypt was all done, all of it, it spoke Arabic, and all of it was done in Arabic. So what the Turks did is they did not dismantle the existing structures. They simply put a new layer of governance on top of that. And that top level governance was done in the Turkish language. So Turkish became the language of the elites of Egypt and across the Ottoman Empire. And they allowed everything else to proceed in whatever languages already existed. So in Syria, in Iraq, they would have continued with those versions of Arabic. When it comes to going westwards, when it came to what they called Rumelia, which is the Balkan region, the Balkans, where you have Serbia, etc., they allowed the local languages to continue, but all the local people, they had to, when they interfaced with the Ottoman Empire, they had to do that in the Ottoman Turkish language. So during the Ottoman Empire's time, there were three major languages essentially in the Ottoman Empire. The language of empire and administration and control and power was Ottoman Turkish. The language of literature was Persian. And the language of religion was Arabic. And that's how it was in the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans never tried to impose their language on the common people. What they insisted on was the religion. So they sought to unify their empire through religion, not language. And wherever they conquered, they imposed the Islamic religion on the people. You can see the effects of that in the Balkans also, Albania and Bosnia and so on. That's the legacy of the Ottoman Empire. So they had so many other subjects. They had the Armenians who continued speaking Armenian. There were the Kurds who continued speaking Kurdish, and so on. So the Ottomans were not imperialistic in terms of language. They were imperialistic in terms of religion. And they were okay with other languages being spoken as long as the language of command and control and administration was Turkish. So that's how it was during the Ottoman Empire. And that's why Egypt never became a Turkish-speaking nation. Mohit Kashyap says, what exactly was the 1979 Vela incident? While it remains officially unexplained, many argue it was a clandestine nuclear test that confirmed Israel's status as a nuclear power. What's the real story? Well, it's still officially unexplained. So what was this Vela incident 1979? In the 1970s, the Americans launched a series of a set of satellites and placed these satellites in Earth orbit. The objective of the satellites was to detect clandestine nuclear tests or non-clandestine nuclear tests. So and these satellites had a bunch of instruments, gamma ray detectors and so on. The satellites had an instrument called a bang meter. I'm not kidding here, okay? Okay, Vela, bang meter, actual bang meter. What's a bang meter? Non-imaging radiometer. Objective is to detect atmospheric nuclear detonations and determine the yield of the nuclear weapon, and so on. The bang meter was invented, blah, 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 description, silicon photodiode sensors, and so on. The name of the detector is a pun which was bestowed upon it by Fred Raines, one of the scientists working on the project. The name is derived from the Hindi word bhang, a locally grown variety of cannabis which is smoked or drunk. Okay, we know what it is. The joke being that one would have to be high on drugs to believe that the bhang meter detectors would work properly. It's a bhang meter, not a bang meter. Okay, so that's the bhang meter, Vela bhang meter. And the Vela incident we have on Wikipedia. So one of the instruments was a bhang meter. And these satellites were launched to detect nuclear explosions anywhere on the surface of the planet. One of the unintended consequences was that these satellites started detecting things in outer space. Things called gamma ray bursts, the most energetic explosions anywhere in the universe. So this new phenomenon was detected as an unintended consequence by the Vela satellites. But that's astrophysics. Coming back to geopolitics. In 1979, between the southern tip of Africa, South Africa, and Antarctica, somewhere between these two regions, one of the Vela satellites detected the signature of a nuclear detonation, a double flash event. So when a nuclear detonation happens, surface above atmospheric nuclear explosion happens, there's a characteristic double flash. The first flash is like a few milliseconds long, very brief and very energetic flash, mostly gamma rays and also visible light, visible photons. And then there's a secondary flash that takes maybe a second or multiple seconds, and that's an intensifying glow, and that's the secondary flash. That's the characteristic of an atmospheric nuclear explosion, this double flash thing. And this Vela satellite in 1979, in this part of Africa, of the Indian Ocean, it detected this characteristic double flash that's a signature of a nuclear blast. And it is mostly assumed today that it was an Israeli nuclear test done in cooperation or collaboration with South Africa, because South Africa also had a nuclear program of its own, which was dismantled before apartheid was ended, so that the South African nuclear weapons don't end up in the hands of the native population, that sort of thing. So that's why the nukes were dismantled and given away to the powers that be. So Israel also, everyone knows, has this nuclear program. It's never been officially acknowledged, but everyone knows Israel is an undeclared nuclear state, nuclear power, with maybe 75 to 100 possibly nuclear warheads. So if you want to have effective working nuclear warheads, you need to test them. And it is believed that Israel conducted 3 nuclear tests possibly in this area. What region was this? Okay, we'll go to Google this time and say Vela incident region. Okay, Vela incident 1979. Where did it happen? Let's see images. Say it's somewhere over here between South Africa and Antarctica. Do we have a larger thing? Okay, this red dot. That's kind of where it happened. Double flash near the South African territory of Prince Edward Islands in the Indian Ocean. So that is the Vela incident. The real story, nobody knows the real story, but it is most likely that it was an Israeli nuclear test done in collaboration with South Africa, most likely. Amisha Mishra says, how common were East Indian from the subcontinent, that kind of slaves in the US? What role did they play in American society? Well, there are very few records of, I'm not sure if there's any records of Indian origin people who were taken as slaves and they lived in the US. Obviously, the British would have sent some Indians also as slaves to the Americas, and probably to North America also, but I'm not sure that any records exist. But what's interesting is that there is a record of an Indian origin lady in New Spain, which is Mexico. Okay, the story of Catarina de San Juan. So let's go to Google and let's see the story of Catarina de San Juan. Okay, she was known as China Poblana, was it's Asian now, Indian-born woman who was enslaved and brought to New Spain via the Spanish East Indies and became revered later as a saint in New Mexico. The true origin is unclear, but her original name, according to legend, was Mira, and she belonged to a noble family from India. She was born in 1605, died in 1688, and you have various stories. Okay, so an Indian noblewoman was sold into slavery and became a spiritual icon. She eventually became a Christian saint, according to the legend. And this was the house of this lady, this Indian origin lady. So she eventually became a Christian saint, and she used to wear a sari, and she may have worn a different kind of dress also, a blouse and a petticoat, and that perhaps influenced the dress that Mexican ladies wear, possibly. So that's an interesting story from the Americas. This Indian lady who was enslaved and taken there, and eventually she would have been forcibly converted to Christianity, and then she became a Christian saint and ended up being the inspiration for a dress worn by Mexican ladies until the 19th century. Catarina de San Juan, that's what she was called. Her original name, birth name, was most likely Mira. Indian origin lady, enslaved and transported to the Americas. Okay. Real Vladimir Putin says, how did marriages between royalties transform alliances? Does this way of transforming relations with a foreign religion, is it still relevant? So let's take some examples. The Gupta Vakatak age. You had the Gupta Empire, and you had the Vakatak dynasty, kingdom in southern India, the Deccan region of India. And one of the great kings of the Gupta Empire was Chandragupta II, the son of Samudragupta. Okay? So Samudragupta's son was Chandragupta II. Chandragupta II had a daughter named Prabhavati Gupta. And Prabhavati Gupta, she married the king of the Vakataks. I forget the name of the king, Rudra something, right? Prabhavati Gupta's husband. Prabhavati Gupta husband. Rudra Sen II of the Vakatak dynasty. So Prabhavati Gupta, who was the daughter of the Gupta emperor Chandragupta II, great Gupta emperor, okay, whose empire was all the way from the Chakshu Oxus River in Central Asia all the way to various parts of India. Huge empire. His daughter Prabhavati Gupta marries Rudra Sen II, Rudra Sen II of the Vakatak dynasty. Now she marries the guy, and within a few years he dies. And by this time, Prabhavati Gupta has two young sons. And one of them has to be the future king of the Vakataks, right? But they're too young. So she has to be the regent. And she has to be the de facto ruler until her sons are of age. So her husband dies young. She becomes a young widow. She has got two young children. And her father obviously is concerned about his daughter's well-being and all that. Her father, the Emperor Chandragupta II. So Chandragupta II, her father visits her, makes the journey all the way from his capital, Patliputra probably, whatever the capital was at the time, and comes and meets his daughter, offers her some consolation and solace and whatever, and maybe starts a geopolitical alliance. So what happens is that Prabhavati Gupta then slowly becomes the de facto ruler of the Vakataks. And this makes the Vakatak kingdom a de facto vassal of the Gupta Empire. So the marriage alliance transformed the whole geopolitical equation, right? That's one example. Another example is the marriage that is said to have happened between Chandragupta Maurya, and allegedly the marriage happened between him and the daughter of Seleucus Nicator, whatever her name was, right? So some historians say this never happened, some say it happened. I'm not sure what it is, but in case the marriage happened, it is what sealed the alliance between India and Greece, India and the Seleucids. So Alexander died after his defeat in India. He died in Babylon, and then his generals fought each other. The war of the Diadochi, whatever it's called, and then Seleucus Nicator, his best general, comes out victorious and starts the Seleucid Empire. And then he comes eastward all over again and says hi to India by starting this short war with India, not a serious war. And then the two, Chandragupta Maurya and Seleucus Nicator probably meet, and they shake hands, and Chandragupta accepts Seleucus's daughter in marriage. And then these two are no longer enemies, they are relatives. And that starts this long-lasting alliance of at least 2-3 generations between India and Greece, India and the Seleucid Empire. And Chandragupta Maurya gives Seleucus Nicator a gift of 500 war elephants, with which he constructs a massive empire, and he never fights India after that. So that's another example of an alliance being created through marriage. And there are many other examples. The marriage between who was the husband of Catherine of Braganza? Okay, let's see this. Catherine of Braganza, the Portuguese princess. Catherine of Braganza. She married Charles II of England. And the dowry, what was the dowry? Among other things, the port of Bombay, as it was called at the time. That's how the British acquired Bombay. Of course, it's now Mumbai. At that time, it was called Bombaya. Bombaya, good bay. So, yeah, that's a significant event in the British occupation of India. Many such examples can be, examined. Amisha Mishra says, why did civilizations like the Roman Empire, India, and China have such big problems with invading tribes? Big civilizations are by definition prosperous, wealthy. They have large quantities of resources, large amounts of land, large numbers of people, and lots of wealth. And when you are a ragtag invading barbarian, what do you seek? You seek plunder, you seek wealth, you seek slaves, you seek prestige. So that's why these big civilizations and empires, they draw invaders like honey draws bears, bees, whatever that honey draws, right? So one good example is the Hepthalite Empire. The Heptalites, we called them the Shweta Hunas, the white Huns. And the Heptalites were attempting to invade India at the same time when their people, the Huns, were invading Rome. The Huns and the Heptalites were essentially the same people, the descendants of the Xiongnu, who came out of what is now Mongolia about 2500 BC and set off a whole domino effect. Eventually, you had the Hepthalite Empire, which ruled a very large part of Central Asia, and they kept on knocking on India's door. And our emperor Skandagupta kept on repelling them over and over and over again. After he died, the doors broke down, and the Hephthalites came down south, conquered Kashmir, conquered Western India, Gandhar, conquered Punjab, Sapta Sindhu, Gujarat, and they set up these Hunnic kingdoms. And they had some good kings and some very nasty kings. There is Toramana, there is Mihirkul. Toramana was okay, Mihirkul was very nasty, allegedly. At least the Buddhists were not fans of Mihirkul. And it is Mihirkul who is supposed to have been the destructor of Takshashila, possibly. So, India, why did the Huns keep on attempting to invade India? Because India was so large, so prosperous. They wanted to rule India. Much better climate, so much wealth. Similarly, the Huns also did the same thing to Rome. Attila the Hun, right? He crossed the Alps by elephant. So it's all about, and when it comes to China, well, China, the Mongols obviously invaded China, but they did not invade China for wealth. They invaded China to teach China a lesson, right? Genghis Khan. So different reasons, but mainly it's plunder. Genghis Khan was never motivated by that, but the Huns and whoever else, the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths and whoever else, they were all motivated by plunder. Okay, that brings me to the end of the questions I have selected. Let's see what we have going on in the live chat. Okay. We have live chat going on. I can see a lot of activity, and I can see 29 super chats. So let us see what we have in the super chats. Football Bhakt says, what are your thoughts on the warrior diet mentioned in the Dhanur Veda? A high protein dairy and low carb diet. Well, I haven't studied the Dhanur Veda. It's a component, a subsection of the Atharva Veda, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm not 100% clear on the diet that mentioned, or may be mentioned in that. What I do recall reading is that it emphasized eating mansa, which is meat, but obviously the clean mansa means fowl that is birds like chicken. Obviously, chicken is an Indian bird, and sheep and goats, not obviously cows or pigs. So eat meat. There was an emphasis on ghee and milk and curd, which is obviously dairy, and there was emphasis on legumes, pulses like chana, chickpeas, and mung beans. What else? And I suppose vegetables as well. Sounds like a very Yamnaya kind of diet. The Yamnaya had this sort of diet, meat and dairy mostly, right? Sounds like that sort of diet, if I recall correctly. So that obviously makes sense. If you are warriors, if you are physically active, you need a lot of protein. You need good sources of calories. You eat ghee. You eat milk. I mean, you consume milk. You eat ghee. And you consume pulses and all. It's going to give you protein, carbohydrates, and meat also, obviously lots of protein and fat as well, and ghee is also high quality fat. So that's a great diet. It's essentially kind of like a ketogenic diet. Obviously, if you eat pulses, the keto part goes out of the window, but still, it's kind of a hybrid diet. Hybrid as in Indian and Yamnaya kind of diet. Yeah. All right. Giora TV says, hello. I have uploaded a video on my channel regarding US's plan to contain China. And I've also included a snippet of your analysis in it. I'd really appreciate it if you could watch it and share your feedback on it. Okay, I won't be able to do it right now, but I'll put that on my to-do list. I'll check out your channel. I'll watch your video, and I could leave a comment, possibly. Okay, so I'll not do it right now, but okay. Thank you for letting me know, and I will look into this. All right, and I'm glad that you're doing something interesting and something creative in this manner. Great job for taking the initiative, and I will certainly check it out. Good job. The Strummer says, the Strummer says, can't the entire world hypothetically come together to thwart US dominance and bullying? Well, hypothetically, anything is possible. Can't Indians all unite together as one culture, one civilization, one people? Well, hypothetically, we can, but look at India today. Forget about the entire world. We Indians are fighting among each other. Right? So, hypothetically, theoretically, everything is possible. But the real world is a messy place. It's complicated. And all these theoretical things and hypothetical things don't really work out properly in the real world. The real world has a lot of entropy and mess. Right? So, all of this will happen if you have the right leadership. Under the right leadership, this can happen. But you will need monumental leadership for that to happen. Even for India to come together and to unite as one, you will need monumental leadership. Leadership that comes around maybe once in 500 years. Yeah? Chandragupta Maurya comes once in 500 years. Kanishka comes once in 500 years. Samudragupta once in 500 years. Rajendra Chola once in 500 years. Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj once in 500 years. That's the kind of leadership we need right now. For India to come together today. India today is a nation divided, right? So theoretically, hypothetically, this can happen, but in the real world, it's very difficult. Explore World says, why neuroscience can't heal bipolar disorder? I am not aware of why it can't. Bipolar disorder, it's about, I'm not very familiar with this. Neuroscience. So neuroscience is the science of the brain, right? Neurosurgery and all that. Neuroscience, the understanding of the brain, the different parts of the brain, and what parts of the body they control and what they give rise to, and so on. And bipolar disorder is this disorder in which people become hyperactive or something. Is it hyperactive people? And we don't quite know how the mechanism works. So yeah, because neuroscience has limitations, lots of limitations. The brain is a very poorly understood organ. We understand the heart very well. We understand the lungs very well. The kidneys, the liver, the spleen, the eyes, the retina, the cornea, all of that we understand pretty well. The brain is very poorly understood. Very enigmatic organ. It's the center of everything, isn't it? So it's very poorly understood, and that's why probably neuroscience still can't heal the bipolar disorder, most likely. Okay, Sangam Kumar says, what will the world look like if China replaces the USA? Well, we shall all be speaking a different language. Yes, we will all be speaking different language. We speak Chinese. Chinese best language. I'm sorry for that. What will the world look like if China replaces the US? Well, it will be a Sinocentric world. Everybody, the center of the universe will become Beijing. Beijing. What's up, China? Will say Xi Jinping. And it will be a Chinese version of the world. Yeah, everything will be in Chinese. Explore World says, will Salman become God after Galvan movie release? I have no idea, sir. I have no idea. Don't watch Bollywood movies, so I can't even remember the last Salman Khan movie I watched. So must be decades that I've seen one of those. Decades, I'm sure. Ah, I have no idea. This is not my cup of tea. I'm sorry. Pratik Shenoy says, I refuse to believe there's any country without corruption. Yet some countries still manage to succeed despite it. Why is that? See, there is no society without crime. Is there a single society on the planet where there is zero crime? No, it's impossible. Why is that the case? Because a certain percentage of the human population has criminal tendencies. Maybe 1 out of 100,000, maybe whatever the statistical number is. A certain small percentage of the population has such tendencies. And that's why in any population, you're going to have some crime. Of course, the crime rates will vary. In India, we have very less crime despite having almost no police. Yeah. I mean, in India, the police, what do? They don't have machine guns, right? They have lathis at best. Go to some other European countries, you'll see police armed to the teeth, and still the crime levels are so much higher. So it depends on the culture, the society, and all. But every population has a certain amount of crime. Similarly, every population has a certain amount of corruption. So it's natural. But some countries deal with crime and corruption better than other countries, right? So why do some countries still manage to succeed despite it? Because the leadership despises corruption and they do everything to stamp it out. And if they know they can't stamp it out, but they can control it, they can keep it under control, and they can keep on detecting and destroying it. They know that new corruption will crop up here and there, but they will again deal with it. But in some countries, hypothetically, corruption is the system itself, and everybody is sharing the pie. In some countries, wherever they may be, maybe some African countries or whatever, I suppose. So that's the deal. The chimp look guy says, biggest fans. Thank you so much, sir. If two countries, example Russia and India, trade in a certain currency, example rupee, to reduce dependency over the dollar, then how will they manage the exchange rate? How will they manage the exchange rate? I suppose they will just go with the existing exchange rates in the world right now. See, both the ruble and the rupee are free floating currencies, right? So whatever the current international exchange rate is, they will go with that. That's how it will be done. They will not. In the past, it was different. In the past, India and the USSR had decided what the exchange rate would be. It was a mutually decided thing. Today, it's not the case. Today, it's free floating. So each currency knows exactly where it stands vis-a-vis the other in the international market. So that's how they manage the exchange rate. Sam the Gamer says MiG-21 was good. India failed on spares versus China's J-7. You know what? The MiG-21 was a fantastic aircraft. It had to be retired because of factors like metal fatigue and whatnot. The airframes were very old. 1950s, 1960s, 60s probably airframes, right? My question is, why didn't India produce brand new MiG-21s in India with brand new airframes and brand new engines? I'm sure the Soviets gave us the blueprints. We simply didn't care for doing these things. We could have reverse engineered the engines and whatnot of the MiG-21 and then made small iterative improvements and come up with our own enhanced version of the MiG-21 and started our own families of jet fighters. We even had the Marut. So the MiG-21 was an outstanding fighter plane. It was the best fighter plane of its time. The Americans were frightened of it. Even until the 2010s and 2020s, it was still a pretty potent fighter plane, right? So it is India's failure, India's lack of vision, lack of ambition, lack of leadership. We could have taken that jet forward. We could have improved upon it. We could have built our own increasingly improved versions and iterations of the MiG-21. We simply didn't care to do it. India, I don't know what sort of leadership and everything we have. I just don't know what to say, really. Lakshman Tahiliani says, can we vassalize our neighbors? Regime change, other means? No, we are simply not powerful enough. Like I explained a couple of times at least in this live stream, we can't. We aren't powerful enough. The US is way more powerful than India in the subcontinent itself. And the US is more powerful than China in China's backyard. That's why China can't take Taiwan. China can't vassalize Taiwan because the US is too powerful in China's backyard. Russia has to fight Ukraine because the US is powerful in Russia's own backyard. The US is the superpower, right? That's why we can't vassalize our neighbors. Godliness says US hegemony is on the rise. World, except for China till some extent, including India, is following the US design. All the talks of de-dollarization, multipolar world seem immature, and Trump still has 3 years. De-dollarization, multipolarity. What other master stroke, Vishwaguru, superpower, all that stuff. Yeah. See, the US is the ultimate hegemon. It is the only superpower. Now we are seeing very clearly the limitations of Chinese power and Russian power. Forget about Indian power. The US has never been as powerful as it is right now. And you can see that they are running roughshod over the Western Hemisphere and twisting the arms of various nations across the world outside of the Western Hemisphere. They're arm twisting India right now with respect to the economic deal, with respect to Russian oil and so many other things. They are squeezing China. They're cutting off China's sources of energy, aren't they? Russia is the one nation that is a hard retaliator, and Russia is the one standing up to the US. China is playing the economic game and the resource game, but China is not standing up to the US militarily. Right? De-dollarization and all. Well, eventually the world will move on to the dollar. That will happen. But it's not some master stroke that is already pre-planned 20 years in advance and all that nonsense. Okay? So let's be mature. Let's be realistic. Let's live in the real world. Let's stop talking about Vishwaguru and master stroke and all that. Okay? I am very optimistic about India, despite all the problems we face. It is likely that India may become a vassal in the next 5 years, but hopefully not. The likelihood is higher than 50%, but hopefully not. So let's be optimistic and hopefully India prevails. Let's see. But let's be realistic and let's not talk about master strokes and God knows what else all the time or ever. Godliness says, based on your critical evaluation of the current geopolitical dynamics, what all historical events you feel will repeat themselves in the future? All historical events will repeat. Okay? I mean, all classes or all categories of historical events will repeat over and over again. But maybe with the advancements in technology, the geopolitical repercussions and ramifications will be much more violent. So what kind of historical events happen? We have the rise and fall of empires. When an empire falls, it's chaos. It's chaos for decades or even a couple of centuries, right? When you also have things like the Thucydides trap, where you have an existing hegemonic power, which is faced with the prospect of a rising hegemonic power, war is inevitable. So that's what we are seeing right now in the world. We are seeing the Thucydides trap being managed by the US and China. The war is happening, but it's a geo-economic war right now. It's not a military war. China can't stand up to the US, no chance. So all these things will play out over and over again. There are various kinds of, rivalries that happen. So all the events that have happened in the past will happen over and over again in the current geopolitical scenario, in the future scenarios as well, in the context of the technologies of the time. Sam the Gamer says, Ukraine war frozen. Is Russia isolated? Ukraine war is kind of a war of attrition right now, a frozen conflict, long war scenario. You know, these terms I have used so many times because of the way things are going. Is Russia isolated? Well, it depends on China. China also depends on Russia more now, increasingly. Russia is significantly isolated, but not entirely isolated. A lot will depend on India's approach now. India is under increasing American pressure to stop buying Russian oil. If that happens, if India bends the knee from that perspective, in that particular scenario, then Russia will get a little more isolated and a little more dependent on China. China is also getting isolated. So the Americans are trying to bring Russia and China together, and then the great masterstroke game plan is to offer Russia a way out of the Ukraine war. But the condition is stop selling oil to China. So that's where we are going, possibly. Sanatani Devansh says, are Gurjars Kshatriyas? Are Gurjars and Kushans related? I suppose some Gurjars are Kshatriyas. Today, the Gurjar people, they exist on both sides of the India-Pakistan border. In the Pakistani side, there are Gurjar Muslims. On the Indian side, there are Gurjar and Gujar Hindus. And the Gurjar people gave rise to Gujarat as well. Are the Gujars and the Kushans related? Possibly. I mean, there are no Kushans today, but millions of people in India will have Kushan ancestry, little bit. So possibly Gujars and Kushans may be related. We're not quite sure. The Kushans eventually just merged into the Indian population, assimilated into the Indian population, just like the Yavanas and the Shakas, the Scythians, right? And the Hunas afterwards. All these late entrants into India, they all just harmoniously assimilated into Indian society. So it's possible that there are millions, maybe tens, maybe hundreds of millions of people in India who have Kushan ancestry, Yavana ancestry, Scythian ancestry, Huna ancestry, little bit, but you can't say. Who will know? So can't say for sure if the Gujars are direct descendants of Kushans or not. Can't say for sure. Krishant Bordoloi says, Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. All right, sir. Happy Valentine's Day to you as well. Stick Life says, USD isn't asset-backed, but neither are most currencies. Any nation can print money out of thin air within its own territory. What's your opinion? Well, you can do that, but that has immediate repercussions on your economy. If you simply print a whole bunch of money out of thin air, it's going to cause, and you put that money into circulation, it's going to cause immediate inflation. Immediate inflation. The value of a currency goes down. You don't want that. You don't want that, right? Anybody can do that, but nobody is stupid enough to do that. The Americans do it, but they do it in a way that puts all the onus and pressure on the rest of the world. The rest of the world pays for the money that the Americans print for themselves. They have rigged the game, the Americans, right? And that's why everyone wants to move away from the US dollar, slowly, gradually, quietly, stealthily, whatever. So the US dollar isn't asset-backed. It is nuclear weapons-backed and military-backed. And that is a very valuable backing to have. Other currencies, what backing do they have, right? Today, there's no currency that is pegged to the price of gold. The ruble was kind of for a while after 2022, but no currency is actually pegged to the price of gold today. I mean, that would make it a very valuable currency. It would make it a proxy for gold, but it's not the case. So the point is, any nation can do this, but it will be devastating for their economy. That's why nations don't do that. Sagnik Acharya says, your views on Nikhil Gupta pleading guilty for Khalistani Panun murder plot in the US. Is it a defeat for the US? How will this impact India-US relations? Yet to be seen. I haven't really analyzed this new development. Nikhil Gupta, some guy, has pled guilty for conspiring to murder this American terrorist, Panun, right? Gurpatwan Singh Panun. Is it a defeat for the US? Is it a bad thing for India? I'm not sure at this point in time. I have not examined the situation. And who is this Nikhil Gupta, by the way? I'm not even sure who he is exactly. So yeah, it's a emerging story, developing story. So maybe day after tomorrow when we do the next live stream, I may be better informed about it. Right now, I'm not really sure. Yuko K says, is India's AI Impact Summit good? Is it worth going? I am not sure. I mean, I hear that all the top players are coming, right? So I suppose it will be worth going if you are in the field of AI to understand what's happening, where the world is going, and what India's relevance in the world of AI is going to be. If this affects you, if you are a part of the thing, if this is your domain, your territory, your field, then it makes sense for you to go there. Yeah. IPK1S says, Sar, nothing, just wanted to say Sar. All right, Sar, thank you. All right. Really now, Miss Patel says, what if US vassals are secretly biding time too? They must loathe being under the thumb. Also, realizing today's realities are grim for India in it. You see, let's say you are a US vassal. It means you are a nation. Let's say a European nation, okay? And you are a US vassal. Does that nation loathe being under the US thumb? If a nation is a US vassal, it means their leadership is completely aligned with the US, which means that their leadership has incentives to keep being on the US side because it puts money in their pockets. So they will not loathe being under the thumb. When it comes to the population of the nation, they may not even know that there is something called vassalhood. They may even not know that the US actually controls their nation. There are various ways of keeping people oblivious to these matters. For example, Japan. Most people in Japan have no understanding of the fact that Japan is a US vassal and under US permanent military occupation. They think it's an agreement between the two nations, and the Americans are they have 130 military bases in Japan to safeguard Japan. That's what they may believe. And they may have been told in the education system that Japan is an evil nation with an evil culture, and that's why Japan must never militarize. They may actually believe this, and they may think that the Americans are the great civilizers of Japan. Like most Indians think today that the British came to India to civilize us. Right? So most nations are not even aware of these matters. Yeah. Realizing today's realities are grim for India. Well, not terribly grim, but yeah. Times are tough. But hey, it is what it is. We'll deal with it. Right? Let us not be discouraged, Miss Patel. Hriday Narayan Singh says, I am a GC, general category person, and blackpilled by what's happening with us. But it feels good that some like me, Ajit Bharti, Dev Talks, etc., have Indian spirit still. Thanks and love. We must never give up. What's happening isn't the right thing, clearly. You know, I have always had, from the first Ask Abhijit live stream I did, I've always had the same message, a message of unity. We Indians must unite. But there are forces in India that seek to divide us by creating these divisions. We know what they say. A permanent solution to a temporary problem becomes a permanent problem. And sometimes people try to create solutions to problems that don't even exist. And this entire matter of caste and all, well, annihilate caste, right? No, you want to perpetuate caste. So there is a big problem with our politicians, and it's a big issue. They seek to divide India further, clearly. And that's very unfortunate. And we need to rise above this. You see, the problem is that a lot of these divisions have been created over the centuries. And it has created this situation in India where you have different classes or categories of people who have differing interests. A number of people will have shared interests, which will be diametrically opposite in some cases to the shared interests of a different group of people. If you are a great leader, you have to ensure that you engineer a situation where everybody has the same interests instead of dividing the nation further. So that's kind of where we are today. This is why I keep saying India is still deeply, deeply colonized. The entire system is a colonial system. And the system will strengthen itself against us, against our civilization. And that's where we are stuck right now in India. And that's what we all have to push back against. Push back in a civilized, legal manner. So let us not be... let's stay optimistic, I would say. Okay, Dark Side of the Moon says, you say AIT is fake. Aryan invasion theory is fake. I'm a techie, beginner in this field. I want to research myself. What steps, fields, papers, data did you follow to reach to the conclusion? I'll give you my article I wrote in 2016, 2017. You can start from there. I've got given all the sources, resources, right? Aryan invasion myth, Chavda. Okay. So you can go to this Medium article. Okay. Just search for the Aryan invasion myth Abhijit Chavda. That's it, all you to search for. So it is an article I wrote in May 14th, 2017. And it's a pretty long article in which I've gone into the entire thing. I've put out all the evidence. Okay, obviously, this is a 9-year-old article, so some of the things may need updation, but it still is very, very relevant and valid. And I have given a bunch of references as well. Okay, a bunch of references. You can check out those references. There are links and references. And yeah, you can start from this, and then you can take your own journey wherever the rabbit hole leads you. All right, sir. Dark side of the moon. All the best. I'm glad that you are interested in this field. You're a techie, so you may have uh, technical knowledge, scientific in a scientific bent of mind that will help you understand this better. All right, sir. All the best. Vicky Khanna says, why ironically many Hindus on X trads bureaucratic announce like Iran of Ayatollah Khamenei. If dharmic people plus military plus bureaucrats plus anon plus common people come together, can they bring revolution and system like Iran? Do a lot of Indians like Khamenei's Iran? I don't know about that. If dharmic people in military and bureaucrats and anons and common people come together, listen, for all kinds of people to come together, you need leadership, really, really strong leadership. Because otherwise, people have their own interests, right? To bring people together takes uncommon leadership. To show them a path in which uniting is the better option and having shared interests is a better option. It's not like, like 75 cats will not voluntarily come together, right? Somebody has to bring them together. Indians are like cats. Indians are also like sheep. I mean, Indians have this superposition of cat sheep thing. Yeah. So Indians, Hindus especially, they simply won't unite. That's very cat-like behavior. Cats will never move in herds. Cats are always solitary creatures, right? But Indians and Hindus also have this sheep-like behavior. So Hindus are a superposition of cats and sheep. But anyway, that's a that's a segue into something else. Dharmic people have their own interests. Military people have a different set of interests, the interests of the nation, possibly, hopefully. Bureaucrats have a different set of interests. Anons, well, they are anonymous. We don't know who they are. Common people, how do you define common people? So all these different groups of people, sets of people, have possibly different interests. Some of these may intersect, many of these may not intersect. So how do you bring them together? You need high quality leadership for that to happen. Where is that leadership? That's the question. Okay, ICMB says, how has Paris maintained some autonomy, unlike UK? Paris has maintained some autonomy. Oh, yeah, Paris. Okay, how has France maintained some autonomy from the US, unlike the UK? Well, first of all, France is not under US military occupation, unlike most other European nations. France isn't. Secondly, France has its own indigenous nuclear deterrent, and the nuclear warheads that France has are indigenous. They are made by France, and they are mated to French-made missiles, ICBMs. Right? Third, the delivery systems, the submarines are also French-based, also French-made, indigenous. The French have their own fighter planes, their own jet engines, their own aircraft carriers. Everything is indigenous. Because of these reasons, the French have autonomy. They have a quasi-independent foreign policy, not entirely independent, but quasi-independent. Right? That's the reason why. Because they are Atmanirbhar. That's why. Angad Griwal says, do you think Deepak Chopra and Stephen Hawking were involved in those cruel things? And why is America rejecting Indian visa? Because I see so India hate. Okay. Look, Deepak Chopra seems to be an absolute hypocrite. Scum of a person, clearly. Right? I mean, the kind of emails he sent to Jeffrey Epstein, I would not even want to read them here. Which clearly indicates that he was involved. He was neck deep in all kinds of murky activities. And the murky activities on Epstein Island can only mean one thing, right? Disgusting, monstrous behavior. So yeah, probably Chopra, Deepak Chopra, was involved in these matters. He portrays himself as a spiritual guru, uh, peddling um, dismantled and digested Hindu spirituality to the Americans while being a Christian himself. So Deepak Chopra, s- scummy person. Stephen Hawking, I don't know about him. Was he also involved in cruel stuff? I mean, he was not capable of doing cruel stuff, but who knows? Who knows? I don't know. Physically, he was incapable because he was paralyzed, but then he was there and he seemed to be pleased apparently. So I have no idea, man. Really, why is America rejecting Indian visa? I'm not sure America is rejecting Indian visas. It's difficult for Indians to get American visas, but I don't see blanket rejections happening. I think wait times are very long and so on. But yeah, it's I don't see a policy of rejecting Indian visas. For example, they've banned Pakistanis and Bangladeshis from getting American visas, but not Indians. So it's not quite the case. India hate, yeah. When you grow as a nation, when you rise as a nation, you're gonna have hate, of course. Soldier Boy says, was the Dyatlov Pass incident USSR experiment or what was it? We don't know what it was. Huge mystery. Dyatlov Pass incident. You know, there's this a group of hikers that went into this forest in the winter. It's frozen all over, snowing everywhere, and they went on this excursion in the hills or whatever in the forest for days, and then they disappeared. And then their bodies were discovered in the tents, all frozen and all. I don't know. Some had massive injuries, and they all looked scared and frightened, and some looked like they'd fallen from the sky or something. So we don't know what happened. Nobody knows. Maybe UFOs, maybe aliens, maybe military experiment. We don't know. Still a big mystery. And they made movies about that. I think with aliens or whatever. So that's in the 1960s or something, like long ago. Dyatlov Pass incident, USSR. Vicky Khanna says, in Pakistan, there are the majority are GC Muslims, general category Muslims, Rajputs, Jats, Sindhis, Kayasthas, Sayyids, Brahmins. Amazing to observe. But why Mujahirs, general categories migrated when heart, money, legacy invested in UP, in Delhi, and bond with Hindu general category? I I don't know why these Muhajirs migrated there. Maybe they thought that they're getting a nation for their own religion and they don't want to live with Hindus, I suppose. Maybe. Yeah. Obviously, these people who migrated to Pakistan would have left behind their homes and lands and whatnot. You know, wherever, UP, Delhi, wherever. Why did they move there? I'm pretty sure it's mainly religious reasons. Mainly religious reasons. Maybe Jinnah was able to inspire them all to leave everything behind and move to this new country, new land, new artificial temporary country. Um, in Pakistan, are the majority general category Muslims, Rajputs, Jats, um, Brahmins. A lot of these Pakistani military folks are converted Rajputs. Well, if you're converted, you are no longer a Rajput, by the way. To be a Rajput, you need to have a Kul Devi. If you're converted, you no longer have one, so you can't be called a Rajput anymore, I suppose. And same with Brahmins and whoever else, right? If you no longer worship, I mean, continue your traditions, then you are no longer part of the original whatever categories you were part of, I suppose. But whatever, the Pakistanis are still proud of their pre-Islamic heritage. Hum Rajput hai or whatever. Come on, man. So I'm not sure why they migrated. Most likely would have been religious reasons. Agam Senpai says, in the 2026 interim frame, India cuts tariffs to 0% while US keeps 18%. China maintains strict reciprocity. Does this asymmetry risk our sovereignty potential vassal route or a calculated trade-off? See, clearly the agreement, this framework, interim framework, is not an equal, um, balanced framework. Clearly, the US has the upper hand, but so does the US with every other partner. If you look at, okay, let's try and see this. Okay, um, what tariffs has US imposed on South Korea, Japan? Um, what about France, Germany? Germany. What about Indonesia? Let's see. What tariffs? So this is from when? This is from a long time ago, August 25. So, okay, this is obviously not recent. So this is, okay, so it's not recent. Do we have something? 2026 overview. Okay, Trump tariff tracker. So let's see. This is not. Okay, Afghanistan 15%, Algeria 30%, Angola 15%, Argentina 10% baseline. Well. Bangladesh 20%, Bolivia 15, Bosnia 30, Botswana 15, Brazil 10, 40%, BRICS 10%, Brunei 25, Cambodia 19%, Cameroon 15%, Canada, fentanyl transshipment, huge on Canada. China 34%, fentanyl 10%, all kinds of other things as well. Denmark 10 plus 25 or 10 or 25, Ecuador 10%, El Salvador 10%, small. European Union's additional threatened 50%, alcohol 200%, and so on. So as you can see, this is a litany of arm twisting over all these nations. Iraq 35%, Israel 15%, Italy to be determined, Indonesia 19%, Japan Japan is a vassal 15%, Kazakhstan 25%. So as you can see, nowhere do you see equal treatment. Nowhere do you see actual reciprocity. The US is the most powerful economic entity in the world, and they will do whatever they want. There's nothing other nations can do. So they are now asking you to pay for the privilege to the American markets. You can't expect strict reciprocity with a nation like the US. The world has changed. The days of 3 to 5% US tariffs are gone, long gone. So this is not something that risks our sovereignty. This is not something that can potentially make India a vassal. This is simply a recognition of the fact that we have an unequal relationship, which is simply a fact. Okay, so it's fine. It's not an issue. I know a lot of people are crying about this and complaining about this, but let's be realistic. No other nation has proper, that sort of balanced relationship with the US. It's unequal every time. Suraj Khandelwal says, any enterprise in India capable of making a jet engine? I don't know. I suppose the new partnership we have with Safran, the French manufacturer, will give us a jet engine, I suppose, hopefully. DRDO can make jet engines, but not powerful enough for full-scale fighter planes, good enough for drones and so on. So yeah, that's where we are. Okay, Amisha says, in history, did most people just not know their age? I suppose it depends on the context. If you were living in an established advanced civilization, maybe India, maybe Egypt, maybe Mesopotamia, maybe China, I suppose most people would have known their age, right? If you lived in a civilization where you had advanced timekeeping systems and advanced calendars, like in India, I think most people, and where you had high levels of prosperity and education, I suppose most people would have known their age. But if you belong to the Heptalite kingdom, the Shweta Huna kingdom, most Huns nomads would perhaps not know their age, I suppose. If you were a Viking warrior, maybe you would not know your age. If you were a Roman citizen in Rome, I suppose you would know your age. If you were an Egyptian citizen, unless you were a slave, you probably would know your age. So it depends on the context and all. Yeah. Anurag Singh says, is the new Bangladesh government beneficial for India, or is it no, or if not, is Roe failed again? Arey bhai, what Roe failed again? What Roe failed again? Bangladesh is now East Pakistan. Bangladesh is ruled and controlled by the US, whether you realize it or not. The election that happened in Bangladesh was not a free and fair election. The most prominent political party, the Awami League, was not allowed to contest the election. It's a rigged election. And if this new guy has won, Tariq Rahman has won, it means he has been allowed to win by the US. And he's going to be beneficial for the US. I don't see this equation changing much. Okay? And it's not Raw failed again. It's not the case at all that Raw has failed. It is simply the recognition of the fact that the US is more powerful than India, even in the subcontinent. It is just a fact of life. Giora TV says India is replacing MiG 21s with Tejas, Mirages and MiG 29s with Rafales, and possibly Sukhoi 30 with Sukhoi 57 in the future. What about Jaguars? Is the world in general dumping ground attack fighters? I'm not sure. Um, the Sukhoi 30s will last a long time, at least a couple of decades. If we do go for the Sukhoi 57 eventually, we could use the existing Sukhoi 30 production lines or assembly lines to produce the Sukhoi 57s in India, possibly, depending on the size of the agreement we reach with Russia. In case we are gonna, let's say hypothetically, we need 200 Sukhoi 57s. In that case, we should set up production lines in India. So we could use the existing Sukhoi 30 infrastructure for that. Yeah. MiG 21s are being replaced with Tejas. Yeah. Mirages and MiG 29s with Rafales. I think the Mirages still have a few years in them. MiG 29s too, maybe a decade at least. So it's not like we are now going to decommission the Mirages and MiG 29s and get the Rafales. No, we're going to operate all these aircraft together because we have a significant shortfall of the numbers of fighter planes we ought to have. Right? So MiG 29s definitely are being replaced with the Tejas. If we can produce the Tejas, you can't produce Tejas fighter planes without jet engines. The Americans are not supplying jet engines, or they're supplying like 3 engines a year. Right? They're choking off India's Tejas assembly lines, manufacturing lines, the Americans, deliberately. They want Pakistan to become more powerful than India in terms of air force strength. Yeah, I don't know about Jaguars. Is the world in general dumping ground attack fighters? I am not sure about that. Jaguars. I don't know what the situation is. Are we dumping the Jaguars? I'm not sure we are. How many Jaguars do we have? I don't think we're dumping the Jaguars. We will continue to operate those as well. Deepak Tripathi says, from my previous question, changed username from the chimp look guy as was difficult. Okay. Actually, I wanted to know about exchange rates will be connected to the US dollar eventually. Look, the entire global system is connected to the US dollar, right? And every currency which is free floating has a relative exchange rate with respect to the US dollar and every other currency. So it's kind of in a mathematical equilibrium. So your exchange rate depends on your relationship with the dollar as well as your relationship with the ruble. So if let's say a currency has the exchange rate of 10 to 1 versus dollar, which means $1 is 10 units of your currency, and let's say the ruble has an exchange rate of 20 rubles to this US dollar, then I suppose your currency, 1 unit, will be equal to 2 rubles, right? That's how it works relatively. So yes, the exchange rates will indeed be connected to the US dollar, but if two countries are transacting their business without the US dollar, then the US dollar will not be involved, even if the currencies are connected in terms of exchange rates with the US dollar. But the transaction is going to bypass the US dollar, which is what ideally nations want. Skylight says, you may want to check out Old Compass, an Indian history channel. I believe he made a 1-to-1 scale of an Indus Valley city. Okay. I shall. Interesting. I shall check it out. Thank you very much for the recommendation. Old Compass. Okay. Thank you. Vihang Khurane says, was HAL Marut actually a decent indigenous fighter jet? Had India been in a better position today if that project matured further? The HAL Marut was an outstanding fighter jet. It was designed by the German designer Kurt Tank. Okay, let's see who Kurt Tank was. Kurt Tank. Sorry, Kurt Tank. So he was a German aeronautical engineer and test pilot. He led the design development at Focke-Wulf from 1931 to 45. He created several important Luftwaffe aircraft like the Focke-Wulf fighter jet, outstanding fighter plane, the Focke-Wulf, and so on. So he was an outstanding designer, okay? And then he designed the Marut, the HAL Marut. And the Marut was an outstanding fighter plane, okay? The only issue the Marut faced was that it had underpowered jet engines, which was not a problem with the plane, it was a problem with the engine. If India had acquired high powered jet engines, the Marut would have been probably one of the best fighter planes in the world. And Indian politicians killed off the Marut. If we had continued the Marut, if we had iteratively improved upon it, we would have been one of the foremost uh, nations with fighter planes today. We would have had possibly multiple families of fighter planes. So our politicians killed off this fantastic fighter jet program. Fantastic, isn't it? RB368, thank you very much indeed, sir. Thank you. A. Rahul says, similarities between ancient Canaanite religion and Norse Vedic Hinduism, Baal, Beelzebub is Indra. No, absolutely not. Catholics called Baal devil during Crusades. See, Baal. The word Baal means Lord or Master. So you can have multiple gods with the epithet of Baal. You had Baal Ammon, Baal something else as well. Okay, so Baal Hammon. Okay, Baal Hammon, which means Lord Hammon. Lord Hammon. Baal something else as well. Baal Hadad. Baal Hadad. So you have multiple gods with the epithet of Baal. Okay, it's not one single god. And the Beelzebub is Baal Zebub, isn't it? The lord of the flies or whatever it is. How can that sort of god be Indra? There's no there's no connection between the Canaanite religion and Indo-European religions. Nothing whatsoever. Sam the Gamer says, why endless delays? It's impacting AVAX refueler. I have no idea. I'm not aware of the situation. Sorry. Dheeraj Kamath says, Stephen Hawking's paralysis did not impact every body part. Okay, sir. All right, if you say so. Pradeep Kumar Roy says, did you see the Baal statue burning in Iran? Really? I'm not aware of this. Let me see quickly. Baal statue burning in... What is this? Burned in Iran. Really? When did this happen? Okay, I was not aware of this. And okay, interesting. Are the Iranians saying that Baal is a Israeli god? Not sure about that, but okay. RB368 says, any thoughts on Cecil Rhodes? Rhodes is a global secret round table organizations peddling globalist propaganda since the early 20th century. I'm not aware of this. Look, Cecil Rhodes was the guy who essentially colonized Africa on behalf of the British, right? There are these Rhodes scholarships that are still offered in his name. So yeah, I'm aware of that much. And he's one of the great evil colonizers of Africa. We know that. Slave owner and all that, slave trader. And yeah, but I'm not aware of the global secret round table organizations peddling globalist propaganda since the earliest 20th century. I'm not aware of that. Sorry. Pradeep Kumar Roy says about Freemasons. I recently found out a Masonic temple near my house. It was built in the 1870s. About Freemasons, once again, I'm not very aware of their history. Kind of begins in obscurity. They seem to be connected possibly with the Knights Templar. And they have been persecuted at times. I think Napoleon or the French banned Freemasons. Freemasonry is banned in some countries in the world. It's quite open in other countries. What are their objectives? Who are they? What are their origins? I am not 100% sure about that. I've not really studied their history. There's a Masonic temple near your house. Well, that's interesting. 1870s. Okay, interesting. I believe that multiple famous prominent Indians were Freemasons. You can look up their names, and there exist Freemason grand lodges or whatever, Masonic temples or whatever in India as well today. So yeah, that much I know, but I'm not aware of their origin story and history and their agenda and objectives. Soldier Boy says, who were Denisovans? Why did they go extinct? Why do Nazca mummies have three fingers, which is intact, found eggs inside their abdomen like reptiles? I'm not sure about the Nazca mummies, um, whether it's a hoax, whether it's a real thing. Looks pretty real from whatever little I've seen about that. The tridactyl creatures, why do they have three fingers? I have no idea why they have three fingers. Were they native to Earth, or were they aliens who died on Earth, or if they are real, or are they fantastic fabricated hoaxes? I'm not sere about that. Who are the Denisovans? They were one of the subspecies of human beings. So we are Homo sapiens. Our cousins were Homo neanderthalis, or Neanderthals, and we also had Homo denisova, or whatever it's called. So that was another closely related subspecies of human beings. And today, Homo sapiens, depending on where you are, some Homo sapiens, some humans today have some Denisovan ancestry, which means that we interbred with them. Some Homo sapiens did that. Who were they? They lived in Eurasia. The first ever evidence of them was found in Denisova cave in Russia, in Siberia, I believe. Some evidence of them, fossil evidence, has been found in Tibet. So clearly, these people lived in Eurasia. They were some species of humans, our cousins, and they eventually died out. I don't know why they went extinct. Maybe did we do that? I mean, it is said that we made the Neanderthals extinct. Maybe even Denisovans. Maybe we are very aggressive as a species. I don't know. Could be. Pradeep Kumar Roy says about Happy Science Japan. They have centers in India too. That's another cult, is it? I've heard. I'm not sure. Happy Science. I don't know if it's a cult or it's just a nice thing, but centers in India. Okay, interesting. Prateek Kumar Roy says, I found out that most of the reformists like Ram Mohan Roy, Vivekananda, Motilal Nehru were Freemasons. Are we controlled by them? Sar joined politics. Yeah, I'm not sure about Ram Mohan Roy, but Vivekananda and Motilal Nehru were definitely Freemasons. At least that's what the website claims. Okay. India Freemasons. So Grand Lodge of India, whatever that is, and if you go there, if you open their website, I hope it opens someday. And what is this? Okay, so there is Vivekananda. And who else have been great Freemasons of India? I don't know who these fantastic gentlemen are, but okay. Who are the historical Indian Freemasons? Do we have something? Do we have a history about us, past grandmasters, etc., etc.? Oh, Shri Ratan Tata, J.R.D. Tata, Rudyard Kipling. Who else? Swami Vivekananda. Who else? Let's go. Motilal Nehru, J.R.D. Tata. So some of these people, as you can see, pretty prominent Indians. I'm not sure about Mr. Ram Mohan Roy, but definitely Swami Vivekananda, Motilal Nehru were Freemasons. At least that's what the website claims. Are we controlled by them? I have no idea. Join politics. Thank you very much for the suggestion, sir. T2 says, thought on Bahaj painted graveware pre-modern Brahmi script. I'm not sure about that. Something that some news coming out of Egypt. Is that what you're referring to? I haven't seen that yet, so it's too early for me to comment. Abhirup Sarkar says, will India have to surrender Sheikh Hasina now? No. Why? Just because some new guy comes to power in Dhaka doesn't mean that we have to surrender Sheikh Hasina. Really? No, we don't have to do that. Don't worry about that. Prateek Kumar Roy says about New World Order. I don't know about New World Order, sir. I don't know about that. They say it's a conspiracy theory. I mean, So I don't know about that. T2 says, your thoughts on Iran's phallus symmetry 3000 BC. I don't know about this either, and I am reluctant to open that search query on Google. So I shall not do that here. I'm not aware of this. I'll check it out. Sounds interesting, perhaps. Not sure. Anyway, thank you. Okay, so that brings me to the end of today's live stream. All the questions are done. Thank you very much. As always, great fun. Okay, we have one more super chat. Freemasonry was founded by Francis Bacon, English guy. Francis Bacon. Well, I've heard stories of some kind of connection with the Knights Templar, you know, back from the days of the Crusades. That's almost like 900 years ago, 1,000 years ago. The Knights Templar were eventually all executed, right? And they left something. There was some connection apparently, which may or may not be true. Okay, Vaibhav Sharma has a question. How Arctic thaw aggravates climate concerns and ignite geopolitical competition? How India strengthens its digital fraud resilience? I don't know about digital fraud resilience, but the Arctic thaw. See, if the global climate becomes warmer, then more ice across the world will melt. So let's say the global temperature rises by an average of 2 degrees Celsius. So it means that some amount of the ice, which is not the extreme poles, will melt because of rising temperatures, right? And some of that will happen in the Arctic regions. That is what's believed. And we know that glaciers are receding and so on. So the Arctic regions of the planet, which hitherto were always, ice-bound throughout the year, they will now start opening up for shipping and commercial traffic and exploitation of resources and all that. So what that could do is it could raise sea levels globally, potentially swallow up countries like the Maldives and cause problems in Bangladesh. And because of this Arctic region opens up for shipping and commercial exploitation, there will be competition in that region for resources between major nations like Russia, the US, and China. China is a near Arctic nation, and so on. So that's how it could ignite geopolitical competition. Okay. Prateep Kumar Roy says about film Eyes Wide Shut, 1999. The film showed some secret Masonic rituals. The director Stanley Kubrick died a few days later, Warner Brothers Productions. I have heard of this story. Stanley Kubrick did die a few days after he finished the movie. And the movie, I think I saw it back in the day, yeah. And all those masks and stuff and some rituals, maybe Masonic rituals. At the time, it was a much younger me. I did not understand much about it. Maybe if I see it now again, I may have a different perspective on it, but I have not seen it in a long, long time. So yeah, it's about secret societies and secret rituals and whatnot, some kind of underlying message as well. Yes, you're right. Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman, who were, I suppose, married at the time. Okay, so that brings me to the final conclusion of this live stream. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for the questions. I look forward to seeing you on Monday, 8 p.m. for the next live stream. It was supposed to be tomorrow, but tomorrow there's a cricket match, India-Pakistan. Nobody will turn up for my live stream. So I'm doing it on Monday, 8 p.m. I look forward to seeing you there. At that time, take care, everybody. Thank you so much for your viewership, for your questions. Keep asking questions, keep learning, keep raising your standards. I shall see you in the next one very soon. Take care. Good night, good day. Bye-bye for now.